Chapter 1. Before New Jersey was New Jersey. Long before New Jersey had borders, highways, townships, or even a name, the land that would one day become the Garden State was a vast, living tapestry of forests, rivers, tidal marshes, ridges, and wild plains. It was a world defined not by maps or written laws, but by memory, movement, and a rhythm older than any colony that would one day rise upon it. It was a world shaped by the Lenape people, keepers of stories, caretakers of the land, and the first to call this corner of North America home. To step into pre-colonial New Jersey is to walk into an era measured not by centuries, but by thousands of years. Archaeological evidence tells us that human beings lived here at least 10,000 years ago, arriving as the last ice age retreated. They followed the tracks of mammoths and mastodons, hunted caribou along melting glaciers, and slowly watched the land transform from frozen tundra into dense forests filled with deer, bear, turkey, and streams teeming with fish. Over millennia, the rivers deepened, the coastline shifted, the climate warmed, and communities grew more settled. The ancient hunters evolved into the people later known as the Lenape, the original people, or the real people, as they called themselves. The Lenape homeland, called Lenape, stretched far beyond modern New Jersey. It covered all of today's New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, southeastern New York, and northern Delaware. But within this broad region, the land that now makes up New Jersey was central, rich, and varied, a patchwork of environments that shaped Lenape life at every turn. From the rolling ridges of the north to the broad farmlands of the central valleys, from the tidal marshes around the Hudson to the deep, mysterious pine barrens in the south. The territory offered almost everything a society needed not just to survive, but to thrive. Life here revolved around the seasons. The Lenape were deeply attuned to the turning of the year, not in a calendar of printed dates, but in the subtle changes of wind, migration, plant growth, and river movement. Spring brought fish runs up the Delaware River and its tributaries. Shad, sturgeon, and striped bass surged inland, and entire communities organized around the bounty. These were times of gathering in large fishing camps, where elders shared stories, children played along muddy banks, and families repaired nets handed down through generations. Spring was also a time for planting. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, grown together in mounded fields that enriched one another's soil. Summer brought abundance. Green forests, berry bushes heavy with fruit, fields buzzing with life. Extended families gathered in larger villages and longhouses filled with the sound of work and celebration. Women tended agricultural fields with remarkable efficiency, their skills passed down through lineages that traced back centuries. Men hunted deer and bear in the forests, paddled canoes along rivers, and traveled along trails that connected community to community. Diplomats, messengers, and spiritual leaders crossed the land on foot or by river, weaving a network of communication that stretched across Lenape. When autumn arrived, activity intensified. This was the season of harvest, of corn dried and stored, squash sliced and smoked, beans gathered and preserved. It was the season of nut gathering, of hunting trips into deeper forests, of preparation for the cold months ahead. Villages bustled with the energy of storage and ceremony. And when winter finally came, life shifted again. Families moved into smaller hunting camps, relying on preserved foods and the game they could track in snow-covered woods. It was a quieter season, one of storytelling, reflection, and teaching young people the traditions of their ancestors. The Lenape were not a single tribe, but a constellation of autonomous communities, each with its own leaders, families, and responsibilities. They organized themselves into 3 major clans, each named after an animal and believed to be descended from it: the wolf, the turtle, and the turkey. These clans stretched across Lenape, creating a social structure that balanced family identity with broader community responsibility. Marriage often occurred between clans, reinforcing interconnectedness and ensuring alliances that held society together. Through these clans, lineage was traced, disputes were resolved, ceremonies were organized, and young people learned their place in the world. Within what is now New Jersey, Lenape communities were intricately tied to the land around them. In the north, along the ridges of the Appalachians and the foothills of the Ramapo Mountains, lived the Munsee-speaking Lenape, known for their stone tools, mountain hunting grounds, and strategic villages perched near rivers like the Passaic and the Hackensack. Their world was one of rocky terrain, fast-flowing streams, and forests where deer and bear roamed freely. Further south, along the Central Valleys and the wide bend of the Delaware River, were the Unami-speaking Lenape. They lived in some of the region's richest agricultural zones, growing large fields of crops, trading widely, and building villages near today's Trenton, Burlington, and Camden. Their dugout canoes glided along the Delaware River, connecting communities from the Atlantic coast all the way into Pennsylvania. To many early Europeans, the Unami were the Lenape they most frequently encountered. And in the far south, near the flat pine forests, marshlands, and tidal inlets, lived the Unalaktigo, masters of coastal life. They fished the estuaries, harvested shellfish in abundance, and navigated the complex waterways of the Delaware Bay. Their world was shaped by salt marshes, sandy soils, and the quiet power of the Pine Barrens, a region that would one day become synonymous with mystery, but which the Lenape knew intimately. The Pine Barrens were not a wasteland, despite the later European name suggesting barren or unproductive land. To the Lenape, the Pine Barrens were a vital resource and a place of deep spiritual significance. They hunted deer among the pines, gathered berries and medicinal plants, and accessed streams rich with fish. The sandy soil made large-scale agriculture difficult, but it also preserved ancient trails and protected sacred sites. The Lenape held ceremonies here, passed through the region on seasonal migrations, and used its dense forests as a buffer during times of conflict with neighboring tribes. The Lenape world was connected by a series of well-worn trails. These were not random paths, but carefully chosen routes. The shortest way between rivers, the easiest way over mountain passes, or the safest way through forests. Many of New Jersey's modern roads, Route 1, Route 130, parts of the Turnpike, follow these ancient tracks. These trails were arteries of Lenape life. Along them, diplomats traveled to negotiate peace. Families journeyed to seasonal camps. Traders moved goods such as shells, furs, feathers, and stone tools, and messages spread across hundreds of miles. Despite being spread across varied environments and independent villages, the Lenape were renowned for diplomacy and peacemaking. Neighboring tribes saw them as mediators, the people who could bring warring groups to the table. Their councils valued long discussion, consensus building, and respect for elders' wisdom. Even when conflict arose, as it inevitably did, they often sought negotiation before violence. This diplomatic reputation would later shape their interactions with European colonists, sometimes to their benefit, and tragically often to their detriment. Daily life in Lenape villages reflected a clear division of labor though not in a rigid sense. Women were central to agriculture, food preparation, pottery, and the upbringing of children. Men handled hunting, fishing, building, and defense. Elders taught stories and traditions that passed down cultural memory, myths of creation, tales of the spirit world, lessons in morality and survival. Children learned from watching adults. A girl observing her mother plant corn. A boy following his father through the woods to learn the movements of deer. Knowledge was transmitted through practice, not through books, and mastery of a skill was a matter of pride. The environment shaped not just daily tasks, but spiritual belief. Rivers, forests, stones, and animals carried meaning. The Lenape worldview was deeply animistic. Everything had a spirit and a place in the larger circle of existence. Balance mattered. Taking too much from the forest risked offending the spirits. Harvesting fish required ceremony and gratitude. Even warfare, when necessary, was governed by codes that upheld dignity and respect. The Delaware Valley, one of the most fertile and strategically important regions in Lenape, played a central role. Its broad waters served as both highway and lifeline. Villages along the river benefited from trade, fish runs, and fertile bottomlands perfect for crops. The valley's forests provided building materials for longhouses, firewood for daily life, and bark for canoes. The river itself was a meeting place where communities across wide distances interacted. It was along these waters that diplomats traveled to resolve disputes, that families gathered for seasonal festivals, and that the Lenape connected with their distant relatives in Pennsylvania and New York. As centuries passed, the landscape remained largely unchanged, preserved by the Lenape's sustainable practices. Their agriculture replenished the soil rather than exhausting it. Their hunting prevented overpopulation of certain species while allowing others to flourish. Their villages were temporary enough to avoid damaging the land, with longhouses built from materials that could be returned to the earth. Even their fires, controlled burns used to clear fields or encourage new growth, helped maintain ecological balance. When early European settlers arrived, they often marveled at the richness of the land, unaware that centuries of Lenape stewardship had shaped it. Trade networks extended far beyond New Jersey. Lenape traders exchanged goods with tribes as distant as the Great Lakes and the Carolinas. Wampum, beads crafted from shells found along New Jersey's coastline, became a major currency in intertribal trade. Not just decorative, wampum carried symbolic and diplomatic importance. Strings of wampum recorded treaties, memorialized events, and sealed alliances. The craftsmanship behind these beads, made from the purple and white shells of quahog and whelk clams, demonstrated the expertise and artistry of Lenape artisans. Before Europeans arrived, the Lenape land was not a silent wilderness, but a fully formed civilization built on agriculture, governance, trade, diplomacy, and spiritual depth. Their world had complexities invisible to the outsider eye. Clan relations, kinship ties, seasonal migrations, political councils, ceremonial gatherings, and a deep connection to the land that had sustained them for countless generations. But change was coming. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Rumors of strange ships on the horizon, stories of new peoples crossing the ocean, strange goods appearing in distant markets. The Lenape could not know it yet, but the landscapes they knew so intimately, the Pine Barrens, the Delaware River, the coastal marshlands, the mountain valleys, were about to become the front line of a new era. When the first Europeans finally arrived, they stepped into a world that had already existed for thousands of years. a world with rules, systems, and traditions of its own. A world shaped by the Lenape, long before anyone imagined a place called New Jersey. What would unfold next, the arrival of the Dutch, the Swedes, and the English, would reshape Lenape forever. But in the beginning, before there was a Jersey of any kind, there was the land of the Lenape. A land of forests and rivers. A land of diplomacy and tradition. A land where life moved with the rhythm of nature, balanced and enduring, until the first shadows of colonization stretched across the horizon. And it is there, in that fragile moment between ancient stability and approaching upheaval, that the story of New Jersey truly begins. Chapter 2. The Dutch, the Swedes, and the race for the New World. When the first Europeans finally appeared along the coastlines and rivers of the Lenape homeland, they arrived not as conquerors, but as curious traders. Strangers stepping into a world older and far more intricate than they understood. For generations, the Lenape had guided their lives according to the cycles of nature and the traditions of their clans. But now ships with unfamiliar sails drifted across their horizons. The quiet balance of Lenape was about to shift. The earliest European presence in the region that would become New Jersey came not from English settlers, as many later believed, but from the Dutch. Driven by profit and guided by the rising power of Amsterdam's merchant elite, the Dutch West India Company sought to cut its slice of the booming North American fur trade. They had already established New Netherland along the Hudson River, and from their base, what is now Manhattan, they began exploring outward, mapping coastlines, rivers, and trading possibilities. The Dutch saw opportunity in every inlet and forest. The Lenape saw visitors from a distant world whose motives were difficult to read. Early encounters were cautious and transactional. The Dutch had something the Lenape valued: metal tools, cloth, beads, knives, and cooking pots. The Lenape had what the Dutch desired: furs, especially beaver pelts, which Europeans prized for fashionable felt hats. Beaver populations in Europe had long been depleted. Suddenly, the cold waters of North America offered a new supply, and traders rushed to capitalize. The Dutch established small outposts, nothing like towns yet, more like seasonal camps or trading stations. They erected makeshift shelters near the mouths of rivers, including the Raritan and the Hackensack, and returned each year with ships loaded with goods to exchange. These early Dutch traders were rough men, sailors, adventurers, and opportunists, who relied heavily on Lenape goodwill. They were also dependent on Lenape knowledge of the land. Without indigenous guides, they would not have known which rivers led inland, where the beaver lodges were found, or how to navigate the tidal marshes. At first, the arrangement seemed beneficial to both sides. The Lenape gained new items that made daily labor easier. Iron axe heads cut wood faster than stone tools. Metal kettles could hang over fires. Cloth was softer and more convenient than animal hides. The Dutch, for their part, secured large quantities of pelts that promised high profits back in Europe. But this early harmony was fragile. The Dutch did not understand Lenape diplomacy, especially the importance of reciprocity and balance. To the Lenape, a gift required a return gift. A trade relationship required ongoing respect and acknowledgement. To the Dutch, a transaction was a transaction, a one-time exchange. Misunderstandings multiplied. Meanwhile, the Lenape observed these newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They noticed how the Dutch, unlike their own people, built structures meant to last. blockhouses, small wooden forts, and eventually stone trading posts. They noticed the Europeans' hunger for land, which seemed odd to a people who viewed land as a shared resource rather than private property. And they watched as more ships arrived each year, carrying not just traders, but settlers. The Dutch West India Company eventually formalized its control over the region, granting land along the Hudson to influential families known as patroons. Their goal was not only to monopolize trade, but to establish colonies that would anchor Dutch influence in North America. Across the river from Manhattan, on soil that would later become New Jersey, they built small forts and settlements. Pavonia, Vriesendale, Communipaw, names that linger today in neighborhoods of Jersey City and Hoboken, began as Dutch footholds on Lenape land. The competition for control intensified when another European power suddenly appeared on the scene: Sweden. Though small compared to the Dutch or English empires, Sweden in the early 1600s was ambitious and briefly powerful. Its leaders decided that the North American fur trade offered a chance to expand their influence. In 1638, they established New Sweden along the Delaware River, centered around what is now Wilmington, Delaware. The Swedish presence might have been small in numbers, but it was dramatic in effect. For the first time, European powers were competing directly for Lenape allies and trade relationships. The Swedes brought better trade goods, including high-quality metal tools and textiles. They also treated the Lenape with a degree of diplomacy that the Dutch had often neglected. Swedish records describe meetings filled with speeches, feasts, gift-giving, and mutual agreements, gestures that resonated with Lenape traditions. Lenape leaders soon realized they could use these competing Europeans to their advantage. If the Dutch offered poor prices for furs, they could trade with the Swedes. If the Swedes imposed unfair terms, they could turn to the Dutch. This leverage granted the Lenape a degree of control in the early decades of colonization. For a time, they were able to negotiate from a position of relative strength, but the arrival of rival European powers also created new tensions. The Dutch viewed the Swedish presence on the Delaware River as a direct threat to their monopoly. They claimed the region as part of New Netherland, and they resented the Swedes for setting up forts such as Fort Christine and Fort Elfsborg. Meanwhile, the Lenape found themselves caught between diplomatic pressures and shifting alliances. The region along the Delaware, today's southern New Jersey, became a patchwork of trading posts, each with its own flags, rules, and ambitions. The Swedish forts were modest but symbolically important. They served as hubs of exchange, places where the Lenape brought beaver pelts, deer hides, and food in return for European goods. The Dutch, determined not to lose ground, established their own posts nearby. Between the two powers, a frontier society began to emerge, marked by trade, cultural blending, misunderstandings, and occasional conflict. Life in these trading outposts was rough and unstable. Europeans struggled with disease, swarms of mosquitoes, harsh winters, and the sheer difficulty of farming unfamiliar land. Their settlements depended heavily on the Lenape for survival. Indigenous women sold corn, beans, squash, and fish to European traders. Lenape men guided Europeans through forests and introduced them to the waterways that defined the region. As more Europeans arrived, the Lenape had to adjust to new dynamics. They watched as the Dutch cleared fields, fenced land, and built more permanent houses. They noticed how the newcomers cut down trees in large quantities, disrupting habitats. They saw old trails widened into roads, riverfronts claimed by forts, and familiar hunting territories shrinking. Cultural clashes became inevitable. The Dutch often failed to understand that the Lenape concept of selling land was closer to leasing or sharing. When the Lenape accepted gifts or payment, they believed they were agreeing to coexistence, not surrendering ownership. The Dutch, interpreting these exchanges through European law, believed they had secured full permanent rights. Disputes over fields and fishing grounds followed. Yet trade continued because both sides needed it. The Dutch economy in New Netherland depended heavily on New Jersey's resources: furs, timber, agricultural products, and the strategic location between the Hudson and Delaware rivers. The Swedes depended on friendly relations with the Lenape to maintain their fragile foothold. The Lenape relied on European goods that increasingly became part of daily life. The region's complexity grew when individual personalities emerged. Traders, governors, settlers, and indigenous leaders whose decisions shaped the fate of entire communities. Governors like Peter Minuit, who helped found New Sweden after his tenure in New Netherland, moved between nations with ambitions that often clashed. Lenape sachems like Matterhorn, Oradam, and others navigated diplomacy with remarkable skill, seeking to preserve peace even as foreign pressures intensified. Stories spread of cultural misunderstandings that sometimes turned tragic. A misinterpreted gesture, an unpaid debt, or a trader acting too aggressively could spark violence. Rivalries between Dutch and Swedish traders occasionally erupted in confrontations, each side accusing the other of unfair competition or illegal land purchases. But despite these tensions, neither European power ever truly dominated the region. For decades, New Jersey remained a contested frontier where no single group held absolute control. The climax of European competition came in the 1650s. After years of rivalry, the Dutch resolved to eliminate the Swedish presence on the Delaware River. In 1655, Governor Peter Stuyvesant led a military expedition southward with several ships and hundreds of soldiers. The campaign was swift and overwhelming. Fort Christina fell. Fort Casimir surrendered. New Sweden ceased to exist as an independent colony. But Stuyvesant's triumph brought unexpected consequences. While the Dutch celebrated their victory, Lenape leaders grew increasingly wary. They watched European power consolidate and expand. No longer could they balance two rivals against one another. The Dutch now controlled the entire region, and their hunger for land intensified. The Dutch continued expanding their settlements along the rivers and coastline. More farms appeared, more fences were built, more forests were cleared. The Dutch West India Company encouraged immigration, granting land to settlers who were willing to cultivate it. New towns emerged along the Hudson River's western shore, including Bergen, one of the earliest permanent European settlements in what would become New Jersey. Yet Dutch rule was never fully secure. They struggled to attract large numbers of settlers. They faced internal disputes, corrupt company officials, and resistance from indigenous people who rejected Dutch interpretations of land rights. And they lived under the shadow of a powerful empire across the Atlantic. England. By the mid-1600s, England had become the dominant colonial power on the eastern seaboard. With flourishing colonies in Virginia and New England, and with its own ambitions for trade and control, England viewed Dutch New Netherland and all of its outposts in New Jersey as an obstacle to expansion. When English forces finally seized New Netherland in 1664, the takeover included everything the Dutch controlled on both sides of the Hudson River. Lenape communities, watching these European struggles unfold, understood that a new chapter was beginning. The Dutch and Swedes had been traders first, settlers second. The English would be something different. Land speculators, town builders, and colonizers on a much larger scale. The transformation of New Jersey was accelerating. Old alliances between Europeans and Lenape were fading, and new colonial governments were emerging. The quiet exchange of goods that had defined the first decades of contact was giving way to the pressures of settlement, land division, and political control. What began as a series of trading outposts and minor forts had ignited a race for the New World. The Dutch and Swedes had competed fiercely, shaping the early character of New Jersey as a frontier of trade and diplomacy. But their time was ending. Ahead lay a new era, an English era, defined by proprietary colonies, land grants, political experiments, and the strange division of New Jersey into East and West. And it would be in that turbulent colonial landscape that the foundations of the future state would finally begin to take shape. Chapter 3: English Rule and the Birth of East and West Jersey. When the English fleet appeared in New York Harbor in 1664, the Dutch had little chance of resisting. Their settlements were thin, their population small, and their political support from Europe uncertain. The English had not come as temporary visitors or opportunistic traders. They had arrived with a clarity of purpose to absorb New Netherland into their growing empire and secure their dominance along the eastern seaboard. For the Dutch, who had spent 40 years trying to solidify a foothold, the conquest unfolded with astonishing swiftness. Nonviolence masked its deeper implications. A complete transfer of power, identity, and direction for the land that would one day become New Jersey. The English takeover did not instantly change daily life, but it changed everything about the political and legal framework that would define the colony's future. New Netherland became New York, and all of the territory west of the Hudson River, the land stretching to the Delaware, fell under English authority. For the Lenape, who had watched Dutch and Swedish flags rise and fall, this new wave of rulers brought more questions than answers. They sensed the English were different, not simply because they spoke another language, but because they arrived with families, deeds, legal documents, and long-term intentions. The Duke of York, brother to King Charles II, now held control of the entire region. But almost immediately, he carved out a portion of his new land to reward two loyal supporters, Sir George Carteret and Lord John Berkeley. Their service to the crown during the English Civil War earned them a prize across the ocean, an enormous but barely settled stretch of territory between the Hudson and Delaware rivers. The Duke granted them full proprietary rights, naming the land New Jersey in honor of the island of Jersey, where Carteret had once sheltered the king. It was an extravagant gift, but it came with a challenge. Berkeley and Carteret were now responsible for governing, populating, defending, and developing a colony that had few European residents and was still shaped by Lenape presence. They knew that a colonial venture thrived not on ownership alone, but on settlers willing to cross the Atlantic. So they issued the Concessions and Agreements of 1665, a document that offered religious freedom, low taxes, generous land grants, and a representative assembly. It was one of the most liberal charters of its time, intended to attract a diverse population. And it worked. People came, Puritans from New England, English settlers from Long Island, Dutch families who decided to stay, Scots fleeing political turmoil, and others seeking opportunity. They arrived by boat and on foot, settling first in the north. Bergen, Elizabethtown, Newark, and the coastal regions near Sandy Hook. These early towns retained hints of Dutch village layout, but now operated under English law. But the English transition was far from smooth. Property disputes erupted almost immediately, especially along the Hudson, where Dutch settlers already held land titles granted by the previous government. Berkeley and Carteret insisted on new payments for the same land, arguing that Dutch titles were invalid under English rule. The settlers disagreed. Clashes erupted as local people resisted what they saw as unfair demands. Some refused to pay. Others appealed to English courts. And still others looked southward, considering whether the Delaware Valley might provide a fresh start under less contentious authority. By the 1670s, Berkeley had grown tired of the constant disputes and the financial burden of managing a colony he barely understood. Seeing little profit and much frustration, he sold his half of New Jersey to a group of Quakers, an act that would change the colony's trajectory forever. That sale created something entirely new: the unexpected and unusual division of New Jersey into two separate proprietary governments, East Jersey and West Jersey. The split was not merely geographic, it was ideological. East Jersey, controlled largely by Carteret and his heirs, remained tied to the English gentry, Anglican interests, and traditional hierarchical governance. West Jersey, controlled by Quakers, embraced a radically different vision. One rooted in pacifism, tolerance, egalitarianism, and some of the earliest expressions of democratic government in the Western world. West Jersey quickly became a magnet for Quakers fleeing persecution in England. Many had been fined, imprisoned, or ostracized because they rejected the authority of the Church of England. They believed in the inner light, in simple worship without clergy, and in peaceful coexistence with indigenous peoples. The Delaware Valley, with its open land and opportunities, offered a place to build a society according to their principles. When the Quaker proprietors drafted the West Jersey Constitution of 1677, it became one of the most progressive political documents of the colonial era. It provided for elected assemblies, fair taxation, and freedoms unheard of in most of the English-speaking world. It banned imprisonment for debt. It required transparent government. And it established a form of governance where ordinary colonists, not aristocrats, held real power. Some historians consider it a precursor to the ideals that would later shape the American Revolution. West Jersey settlers founded Burlington as their capital, building it along the banks of the Delaware River. The town quickly became a bustling port, attracting merchants, artisans, and farmers. Quaker diplomacy with the Lenape proved more respectful and enduring than many earlier colonial relationships. Though not free of tensions, encounters were grounded in negotiation rather than force. Land was purchased through treaties that both sides witnessed, recorded, and reaffirmed. Meanwhile, East Jersey developed along a different path. After Carteret's death, his proprietorship passed to a group of Scottish investors who sought to create a new homeland for Scots, fleeing political upheaval and economic hardship. These settlers brought with them Presbyterian faith, a love for ordered town planning, and a background in trade. Perth Amboy became the capital of East Jersey, growing into a significant port with easy access to New York's expanding markets. Both Jerseys prospered in their own ways. East Jersey's towns were more densely settled, influenced by both Puritan and Scottish character, with laws that reflected English governance. West Jersey remained more rural, scattered with farms and Quaker communities committed to simplicity and fairness. The two regions developed their own identities, their own patterns of speech, religious customs, and local governments. Though part of the same geographical territory, They lived like two distinct colonies. Neighbors, sometimes rivals, and occasionally partners when circumstances required unity. But governing two separate Jerseys proved cumbersome. Borders were disputed, authorities overlapped, and settlers often did not know which government held jurisdiction over their land or their taxes. Proprietors in both regions struggled to attract enough settlers to fully populate their lands. The Lenape, already under pressure from earlier colonization, now faced multiple layers of English authority, each demanding treaties and payments. Confusion became a defining feature of the political landscape. Tensions simmered between East and West Jersey proprietors, especially when it came to customs duties, trade regulations, and control of ports. Merchants in East Jersey complained that West Jersey traders were bypassing inspections, depriving them of revenue. West Jersey settlers accused East Jersey officials of corruption and excessive taxation. Both sides accused the other of mismanaging land rights. Complaints traveled back and forth across the Atlantic, where English authorities, overwhelmed by larger imperial issues, often ignored colonial disputes until they boiled over. Despite the friction, life in the Jerseys continued to evolve. New towns emerged: Woodbridge, Piscataway, Salem, Shrewsbury, and others. Farmlands expanded. Mills appeared along rivers. Ships loaded with grain, lumber, and livestock began sailing for Caribbean markets, exchanging New Jersey produce for sugar, rum, and manufactured goods. A hybrid culture took shape. English, Dutch, Swedish, Scottish, and Lenape influences mixing in ways unique to the region, but the proprietary governments were unstable. Proprietors lived mostly in England, far removed from the realities of colonial life. They issued instructions and expected obedience, but settlers wanted autonomy. Many refused to pay quitrents, annual fees that proprietors claimed as their right. Others petitioned the crown, arguing that only direct royal governance could resolve the chaos. Meanwhile, conflicts with the Lenape escalated as more land was taken, more treaties manipulated, and more pressure applied to indigenous communities already weakened by disease and displacement. By the early 1700s, dissatisfaction reached its peak. Both East and West Jersey settlers, though divided culturally, found common ground in their frustration with proprietary rule. In 1702, after years of petitions, legal challenges, and political wrangling, the proprietors surrendered their governing rights to Queen Anne. The two Jerseys were united as a single royal colony, New Jersey. This unification did not erase the regional differences that had defined the two halves. The cultural divide lingered, shaping future politics, economic development, and local identity. East Jersey, closer to New York, maintained a more urban and commercially oriented character, while West Jersey retained rural, agricultural, and Quaker traditions. The old division echoed through the colony's development for generations, influencing voting patterns, religious composition, and attitudes toward authority. Under royal rule, New Jersey stabilized, but remained overshadowed by its larger neighbors, New York and Pennsylvania. Yet its strategic position between two major colonies gave it importance, especially as tensions grew between Britain and the American colonies. The legacy of East and West Jersey, two territories accustomed to self-government, independent thinking, and resistance to distant authority, would shape New Jersey's role in the dramatic events that lay ahead. For now, however, in the early 1700s, the colony had reached a turning point. The Dutch and Swedes were gone. Proprietary rule had collapsed. English royal administration had taken firm control. New Jersey was unified, but still divided in spirit. shaped by the contrasting ideals of its earliest settlers. Ahead lay a new era, one of increasing population, economic expansion, cultural diversity, and rising unrest. In the decades to come, New Jersey would not simply be a colony at the edge of empire. It would become a pivotal battleground for ideas, people, and armies in the epic struggle that would define a nation. Chapter 4: The Road to Revolution. By the early 18th century, New Jersey had settled uneasily into life as a royal colony. The proprietary experiment had ended, but the frustrations that fueled it did not vanish. New Jersey's people, English, Dutch, Scottish, German, Quaker, and many others, had grown used to managing much of their own affairs. They were not accustomed to being treated as mere subjects at the far edge of an empire. Yet that is exactly what London increasingly expected. The Crown installed royal governors, asserted authority over local assemblies, and demanded economic obedience. It was a shift that many colonists felt viscerally, though the true storm had not yet arrived. Daily life in New Jersey continued with a sense of cautious normalcy. Farms expanded, mills turned along rivers, schooners carried grain, pork, and timber down the Delaware River, and new towns emerged as waves of immigrants arrived from Europe. Yet beneath the surface, something was changing. Settlers began to recognize that their colony, sandwiched between the booming ports of New York and Philadelphia, was more valuable than it appeared. Roads, ferries, and rivers turned New Jersey into a central corridor of trade. Goods flowed through it. Ideas flowed through it. People moving north or south inevitably passed through its taverns, markets, and meeting houses. New Jersey was becoming a crossroads of the American colonies, a place where information spread quickly and passions stirred easily. It was in these currents of trade and communication that the first sparks of discontent flickered. British oversight grew heavier as the empire sought to tighten its grip after decades of what historians now call salutary neglect, a period when London largely let the colonies run themselves. But the French and Indian War changed everything. Britain emerged victorious but staggering under debt. If the empire had paid for defending the colonies, London believed, should help pay the bill. The result was a parade of taxes and regulations that would reshape colonial life. The Sugar Act, the Currency Act, the Stamp Act, each hit New Jersey in ways both practical and psychological. While Boston and Philadelphia voiced their outrage loudly, New Jersey's anger simmered more quietly, but it simmered all the same. Farmers complained of new burdens. Merchants bristled as customs officers tightened enforcement. Lawyers and printers denounced the Stamp Act with particular fury, for it directly affected their livelihoods. In East Jersey, near New York, resentment grew as port inspectors harassed traders and ships were seized for minor infractions. In West Jersey, Quakers, though committed to peace, began questioning the justice of taxation without representation. Taverns became the unofficial nerve centers of the colony's political awakening. In towns like New Brunswick, Trenton, Burlington, and Newark, men gathered to drink, debate, and argue. Tankards of ale and cider lubricated discussions about Parliament's overreach and the rights of Englishmen. Newspapers circulated from hand to hand, their articles dissected in crowded rooms that smelled of wood smoke and spilled rum. In these gatherings, the colony's political consciousness sharpened. Coffeehouses played a quieter but equally important role. Imported from England and Holland, they had become places where merchants, ship captains, ministers, and educated men exchanged the latest news from London and debated philosophy, economics, and politics. Enlightenment ideas found fertile ground: natural rights, social contract theory, liberty, the limits of government. Many who entered these discussions did not initially imagine rebellion. They simply sought fairness. But as months turned to years, and frustrations layered upon frustrations, the tone shifted from petition to protest. New Jersey's political landscape was complicated. Its geography divided it between competing influences: New York's orbit in the north, Philadelphia's intellectual power in the south. Its population was religiously diverse: Presbyterians in the north, Quakers in the west, Dutch Reformed families in old settlements, and Anglicans scattered along major roads. These differences ensured that New Jersey never revolted as a single unified voice. Instead, rebellion emerged piecemeal, pushed forward by individuals who would later be recognized as patriot leaders. One of the earliest was William Livingston, a fiery writer, lawyer, and political thinker who moved to New Jersey and quickly became a leading advocate for colonial rights. His essays criticized royal policy with sharp wit and clear logic. Another influential figure was Richard Stockton, a respected lawyer whose oratory inspired many. John Witherspoon, president of the College of New Jersey, known today as Princeton University, brought Scottish Enlightenment influence to the colony. He trained a generation of thinkers and statesmen who would become key figures in the Revolution. These men, along with many local farmers, merchants, millers, and artisans, gradually steered public opinion toward resistance. Still, New Jersey remained divided. Many families had strong economic ties to New York and the Empire. Others feared the instability rebellion might bring. Quakers, committed to nonviolence, struggled with the thought of supporting any movement that hinted at war. Loyalists, those who supported continued allegiance to the crown, were numerous, especially in East Jersey. New Jersey's revolutionary story would ultimately be as much about neighbors disagreeing as it was about colonies rebelling. Tensions escalated dramatically with the Townshend Acts, which placed duties on glass, paper, lead, and tea. New Jersey merchants reluctantly joined non-importation agreements, refusing to buy British goods in protest. Smuggling increased. Customs officials responded with aggression. Anger flared near Perth Amboy and Newark, where British authorities seized ships suspected of violating trade laws. Crowds gathered to protest. Boycotts tightened. Even those who preferred to stay out of politics found themselves forced to choose sides when friends, customers, or local committees demanded loyalty. By 1770, the colony had become a stage where imperial authority felt increasingly fragile. Each confrontation chipped away at the belief that reconciliation was possible. When the Boston Massacre occurred that year, news reached New Jersey within days. Shock and outrage rippled through taverns and meeting houses. Committees of correspondence, informal networks of patriot leaders, sprang up in New Jersey towns to coordinate resistance and share intelligence with other colonies. Suddenly, the grievances of Massachusetts and Virginia felt inseparable from the grievances of New Jersey. The Tea Act of 1773 intensified the crisis. New Jersey had no Boston harbor, and it saw no tea ships set ablaze by patriots. But the colony erupted in protest nonetheless. In Greenwich, near the Delaware River, a group of patriots disguised themselves in native clothing and burned a shipment of tea in a nighttime spectacle that mirrored Boston's more famous protest. The Greenwich tea burning, though smaller in scale, became a symbol of New Jersey's willingness to resist British authority. Meanwhile, The intellectual fire of revolution burned strongest in places like Princeton, where students debated the future of the colonies with fervor. John Witherspoon delivered sermons and lectures urging moral courage, warning that spiritual liberty could not exist without civil liberty. His students would later sit in the Continental Congress, serve in the Continental Army, and help write the Constitution. Ideas forged in Princeton classrooms traveled far beyond the campus walls. New Jersey's status as a crossroads made it a corridor of movement, both physical and political. The colony lay directly between New England and the southern colonies, between New York's harbor and Philadelphia's assemblies. News traveled fast, carried by stagecoaches along the King's Highway, by ferries crossing rivers, and by merchants who moved between cities. As tensions with Britain escalated, armies would eventually march through New Jersey dozens of times. But even before war broke out, the colony pulsed with the urgency of events unfolding elsewhere. After the coercive acts of 1774 punished Boston, solidarity spread across the colonies. New Jersey sent delegates to the First Continental Congress, where a sense of shared grievance solidified. Though the colony's leaders remained cautious, they supported calls for rights and reforms. When the Second Continental Congress reconvened the following year, New Jersey's delegation included men who would soon embrace outright independence. Still, New Jersey did not move in a straight line toward revolution. Loyalism remained strong, especially among large landowners who feared rebellion would destroy property and order. Others, particularly those with deep commercial ties to the empire, believed they had more to lose by breaking with Britain. But patriot leaders pressed forward, using pamphlets, sermons, and local committees to rally support. Richard Stockton, though initially cautious, eventually joined the ranks of those calling for decisive action. Then came the battles of Lexington and Concord. The news reached New Jersey quickly, and the reaction was immediate. Militia units across the colony began drilling, stockpiling powder, and preparing for conflict. Farmers who had spent their lives tilling land now trained with muskets behind barns and in town squares. Men who had never dreamed of soldiering found themselves chosen for committees of safety or local militias. Tensions with loyalists intensified. Neighbors eyed one another warily. Old friendships strained under the weight of political division. When the Continental Congress voted for independence in July 1776, New Jersey played a pivotal role. Its delegates, Livingston, Stockton, Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, Abraham Clark, signed their names to the Declaration of Independence, marking a decisive turn in the colony's identity. New Jersey would no longer be a territory caught between empires. It would be a state fighting for its own future. But independence brought immediate danger. British forces landed on Staten Island, preparing a massive invasion. New Jersey's central location meant it would soon become a battlefield, a place where armies clashed and civilians endured unbearable hardship. The colony that had once been a quiet agricultural and mercantile province was about to become the front line of the American Revolution. By the end of 1776, New Jersey's towns and farmlands would witness some of the most dramatic moments of the entire war. Washington's desperate retreat, the nighttime crossing of the Delaware, the battles of Trenton and Princeton. But before the cannons roared and armies marched, New Jersey had already become essential to the march toward independence. It was here, in the crossroads of the colonies, in the taverns and coffee houses, along the roads and ferries, in the sermons of Witherspoon and the pamphlets of Livingston, that resistance matured into revolution. What began as quiet grievances had become a movement. What began as debate had become action. And soon, New Jersey would be the stage for a daring counterstrike that would turn the tide of the entire war. Chapter 5. Battlefield of the American Revolution. By the winter of 1776, New Jersey had become a land suspended between hope and despair. The early idealism of independence had evaporated beneath the marching boots of British and Hessian soldiers. Farms were stripped of livestock, homes were ransacked, and the laws of the new state seemed powerless in the face of an empire determined to crush rebellion. Many New Jersey families fled. Others hid their food and prayed for mercy. Loyalists, long at odds with their patriot neighbors, now saw an opportunity to settle personal scores under British protection. For a moment, it seemed the revolution might die before it truly began. George Washington understood this better than anyone. After defeats in New York, the Continental Army had been driven across New Jersey in a chaotic retreat. The men were cold, exhausted, and outnumbered. British General William Howe believed the rebellion was on the verge of collapse. Hessian troops spread across New Jersey, occupying towns from New Brunswick to Trenton. British officers celebrated prematurely, confident that the winter would end the war. Even Washington's own officers whispered doubts about their chances. But Washington saw something else in the bleak December landscape: opportunity. New Jersey's rivers and roads, which had hindered him during the retreat, could be used to strike back. Its geography, its people, its proximity to Philadelphia and New York, all made it a natural stage for the turning point of the revolution. But only if he moved quickly, boldly, and with absolute secrecy. Rumors spread quietly through patriot circles. Washington was planning something. Men whispered around campfires, sharing scraps of overheard discussions. But the exact plan remained locked inside the minds of the general and a handful of trusted officers. The stakes were nothing less than the survival of the Continental Army. On Christmas night, 1776, while Hessian soldiers in Trenton celebrated the holiday with food, drink, and a false sense of security, Washington led his force of 2,400 men to the icy banks of the Delaware River. The night was brutal. Snow, sleet, and wind hammered the troops as they boarded Durham boats and ferries. Many soldiers had no boots, wrapping rags around their feet for warmth. One unit left a trail of blood on the frozen ground. But morale, precarious days earlier, now hardened into a steely determination. Washington rode among the ranks, reminding them what they fought for: not only independence, but dignity, survival, and the right to shape their own future. The crossing took hours longer than planned. Ice floes smashed against the boats, horses panicked, cannons nearly slipped into the river. But somehow, miraculously, the army made it across. They marched toward Trenton through snow and darkness, leaving footprints that froze as soon as they touched the ground. When they reached the outskirts of the town just before dawn, Hessian sentries barely noticed them until it was too late. What followed was swift and decisive. Washington's troops stormed Trenton from multiple directions, surprising the Hessians who scrambled from their beds and tried to form ranks. The battle lasted barely an hour. When it ended, nearly 1,000 Hessians were captured, and the Patriots suffered only minimal casualties. For the first time in months, Washington had not only avoided disaster, he had achieved a stunning victory. News spread like wildfire. In New Jersey's farmhouses, churches, and taverns, people embraced one another and wept. Many who had abandoned hope now believed independence might actually be possible. New Jersey had delivered the first major triumph of the war. But Washington was not finished. Knowing the British would retaliate swiftly, he withdrew to the Pennsylvania side of the river, then crossed again into New Jersey a few days later, this time determined to hold Trenton. British General Charles Cornwallis marched south with a powerful force, convinced he could trap the rebels. New Jersey families watched the red-coated columns march past their homes, their drums echoing through the winter air. On January 2nd, 1777, Cornwallis arrived at Trenton. Washington's men, outnumbered and exhausted, held a defensive line along Assunpink Creek. Twice the British attempted to force a crossing. Twice they were repelled. As night fell, Cornwallis declared confidently that he had the old fox trapped and would finish him in the morning. But Washington was already preparing his escape. That night, in the dead of winter, the Continental Army silently slipped away. They moved northeast along icy back roads, guided by New Jersey farmers who knew the terrain intimately. The soldiers marched all night, arriving near Princeton just as dawn touched the horizon. The British forces stationed there were unprepared. Washington's troops struck quickly, routing the enemy in a fierce battle across fields, orchards, and the grounds of the College of New Jersey. It was during this battle that Washington delivered one of the most iconic moments of the war. Riding his horse directly toward the British line to rally his retreating troops, bullets whizzing past him, his presence turning panic into resolve. The victory at Princeton, coming on the heels of Trenton, cemented the turning tide of the war. New Jersey was no longer merely a battlefield. It was the place where the Revolution survived. In the months and years that followed, New Jersey earned a new name: the cockpit of the Revolution. The term, drawn from the image of a confined fighting space where combatants struggled intensely, reflected how often its towns, fields, and crossroads saw action. More than 200 skirmishes and battles occurred within its borders. Armies marched across it repeatedly. Raids, ambushes, and spy missions became part of daily life. Civilians lived in constant uncertainty, caught between patriot forces, British troops, loyalist militias, Hessian detachments, and opportunistic bandits. One of New Jersey's least visible but most decisive contributions to the Revolution came through intelligence work. The state became a hive of espionage. Patriot spies operated from taverns, ferries, and farmhouses. Messages traveled hidden inside buttons, sewn into clothing, or carried by riders who memorized every detail of British troop movements. The famous Culper spy ring operated largely from New York and Long Island. But its intelligence passed frequently through New Jersey on the way to Washington's headquarters. Loyalist spies also operated throughout the state, feeding information to British commanders and sometimes sparking brutal reprisals when suspected patriots were identified. Life for civilians grew precarious. Homes were burned. Livestock was confiscated. Families were displaced. New Jersey farmers were forced to sell crops to whichever army arrived first, often receiving worthless paper currency in return. Loyalists and patriots clashed not only in major battles, but in personal feuds, settling grudges under the cover of war. At times, it seemed the conflict was less a battle between colonies and empire, and more a civil war between neighbors. Washington's army spent 2 harsh winters in New Jersey, once in Morristown in 1777, and again during the brutal winter of 1779 to 1780. The cold was so severe that the Hudson River froze solid. Supplies were scarce. Soldiers mutinied over lack of food, pay, and proper clothing. One mutiny by Pennsylvania troops in Morristown turned violent. Washington, fearing the army might unravel, responded with a mixture of firmness and compassion. He understood the men's suffering, but also knew the survival of the revolution depended on discipline. New Jersey communities bore the burden as well. Residents housed soldiers, donated food, and forged supplies. Women took on critical roles, managing farms, sewing uniforms, organizing relief efforts, and maintaining morale. African Americans, both free and enslaved, served in New Jersey regiments, worked as laborers, or sought freedom through military service. Indigenous people, including the Lenape, were pulled into the conflict through alliances, pressures, and survival decisions. In 1778, New Jersey became the site of one of the war's largest engagements, the Battle of Monmouth. British forces under General Henry Clinton were retreating across New Jersey, hoping to reach New York before Washington's army could intercept them. The two armies collided in the scorching heat of Monmouth County. The battle lasted an entire day, marked by confusion, intense fighting, and moments of legendary courage. Perhaps none became more famous than the woman remembered as Molly Pitcher, believed to be Mary Ludwig Hayes, who carried water to the troops and took over her husband's cannon when he fell in battle. Though the Battle of Monmouth ended indecisively, it demonstrated how far Washington's army had come. His soldiers held their ground against British regulars. Their training under Baron von Steuben at Valley Forge had transformed them from a desperate militia into a disciplined fighting force. Monmouth proved they could match the British in open battle. After 1778, most large-scale fighting moved away from the middle colonies. But New Jersey remained a constant battleground of raids, espionage, and skirmishes. British forces occupied New York, and their presence radiated into New Jersey like a constant threat. Loyalist militias launched nighttime attacks, burning Patriot homes and stealing supplies. Patriot forces retaliated. The cycle of violence wore down communities, leaving deep scars long after the war ended. Yet through all the hardship, New Jersey's spirit held firm. The state supplied troops, food, weapons, iron, and leadership far beyond its size. New Jersey's delegates played key roles in the Continental Congress. Its towns hosted critical councils. Its roads carried messages that shaped entire campaigns. Without New Jersey, the revolution could not have survived, let alone succeeded. When the war finally wound down and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, New Jersey emerged battered but proud. The fighting had left farmlands ruined and families grieving. But it had also forged a collective identity rooted in resilience. New Jerseyans had experienced the revolution not as distant observers, but as people living on the front lines. They had seen Washington's army at its lowest and at its most triumphant. They had watched battles unfold in their orchards and fields. They had endured the chaos of armies, spies, betrayals, and destruction. New Jersey had been the cockpit of the revolution, a compressed arena where the fate of the nation trembled repeatedly on a knife's edge. Now, as peace spread across the land, the state faced a new question. What kind of nation would emerge from the ashes? And what role would New Jersey play in shaping it? The war had ended, but the struggle to define America had only begun. Chapter 6. A New State Emerges. When the gunpowder smoke finally cleared and British soldiers boarded their ships to leave American shores, New Jersey found itself standing in the quiet aftermath of a revolution fought quite literally in its own backyards. The orchards of Monmouth were still scorched. the roads around Trenton still carried the memory of desperate marches. Morristown's hills held stories of mutiny and survival. But now, after nearly a decade of chaos, New Jersey was confronted with an entirely different kind of challenge: building a state out of the ruins. Victory did not immediately bring prosperity. Farms had been abandoned, livestock stolen, homes burned, fences torn down, and mills destroyed. Years of marching armies had compacted fields and drained resources. Many families were left with little more than scorched earth and uncertainty. Soldiers returning home found debts waiting for them, land disputes unresolved, and a fragile economy struggling to rebalance. Loyalists, once protected by British forces, fled or attempted to reintegrate, sometimes meeting hostility from former neighbors. Communities strained to stitch themselves back together. Yet beneath the hardship lay a sense of profound possibility. Independence had been won. A new government was taking shape. For the first time, New Jerseyans could imagine their own political future without interference from distant kings, royal governors, or foreign empires. They now had to answer questions that had no precedent. What did it mean to be a citizen of a republic? How should the state govern itself? And how could a people emerging from war ensure the freedoms they had fought so hard to secure? Even before the war ended, New Jersey had taken steps toward political self-definition. In 1776, while the fighting raged, the colony had adopted one of the first state constitutions in the new nation. Written hastily out of necessity, it provided the basic scaffolding for governance: an elected assembly, a governor chosen by that assembly, and protections for certain rights. It was a pragmatic document crafted in the shadow of conflict. Few expected it to last long, yet it would remain the backbone of New Jersey politics for decades. One of its most remarkable features was a clause that would later astonish historians. It allowed all property-owning inhabitants, including women and free black residents, to vote. It was not a deliberate feminist or egalitarian revolution. The language emerged from rushed drafting and from Quaker influence on notions of equality. Legislators used the word inhabitants rather than men, and because property ownership was the primary requirement, widows who held land, unmarried women with inherited property, and free black citizens who met the property threshold were legally enfranchised. New Jersey thus became the first, and for many years, the only state in the nation where women voted regularly in local, state, and even national elections. In towns across the state, it was not unusual in the late 1700s to see women arriving at polling places on election days, standing alongside male voters. Newspapers commented on it. Political candidates canvassed these women for support. Free black property owners, too, exercised their right to vote. Though the practice would later be rolled back in the early 19th century, it remains one of New Jersey's most unexpected and striking political firsts. A reminder that revolutionary ideals often unfold in ways their framers never anticipated. But governance involved far more than elections. New Jersey needed to rebuild its economy, restore its infrastructure, and define its place in the new national union. The state's leaders understood that New Jersey's geographic advantages, its central location between New York and Philadelphia, its network of rivers, and its fertile farmland, could help propel a post-war recovery. Early industry began to emerge almost immediately. Ironworks, which had supplied weapons and tools during the war, shifted back to civilian production. Forges in places like Ringwood, Boonton, and Mount Holly roared back to life. Mills along the Passaic, Raritan and Delaware rivers resumed grinding grain, sawing lumber, and spinning wool. The state's location made it a natural transportation hub, and ferries and stagecoaches began running more regularly along routes that connected the nation's growing cities. New Jersey farmers, long known for the quality of their produce, sent goods to markets from Manhattan to Philadelphia. In towns and villages, citizens rebuilt taverns, schools, and churches. Legislators passed laws to stabilize currency, regulate commerce, and encourage manufacturing. New Jersey merchants sought to re-establish ties with Caribbean and European trade markets disrupted by the war. Immigration resumed, bringing new laborers and craftspeople into the state. Slowly, painfully, prosperity began to return. Politics, too, found its rhythm. The state assembly met regularly, debating issues ranging from taxation to property rights to public education. Factions formed and dissolved, but the tone of politics had changed. Without royal oversight, New Jerseyans found themselves more invested in state affairs. Town meetings and county courts attracted lively participation. Citizens wrote letters to newspapers, engaged in public debates, and learned to see themselves as active participants in shaping government. But not everything was smooth. The 1780s were a decade of growing pains for the entire young nation. The Articles of Confederation, under which the states were loosely united, proved too weak to address urgent economic and political challenges. Trade disputes erupted between states. Inflation soared, debts mounted, smuggling became rampant. In New Jersey, farmers protested tax burdens and demanded fairer economic policies. The state's strategic location, once a blessing, now placed it at the center of interstate conflicts. New York taxed goods moving through its harbor, harming New Jersey merchants. Pennsylvania competed aggressively for river trade. Calls for reform grew louder, and New Jersey responded with unusual clarity. When delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787 to revise the Articles of Confederation, New Jerseyans pushed strongly for a more balanced national government. William Paterson, one of the state's most respected political minds, presented what became known as the New Jersey Plan, advocating equal representation for each state. While the plan was ultimately combined with proposals from larger states, it formed the foundation of the Senate, ensuring that small states like New Jersey would never be overshadowed. When the new Constitution was sent to the states for ratification, New Jersey acted with decisive speed. On December 18, 1787, it became the third state to ratify the Constitution, and the first to do so unanimously. Its leaders recognized that a stable federal government would protect the state's economic interests and secure its political influence. New Jersey embraced the new union wholeheartedly, ready to help shape the future of the young republic. Once the Constitution took effect, New Jersey entered a period of steady growth. Its towns expanded, its roads improved, and its industries diversified. Paterson, later named after the influential statesman, began developing as a center of innovation. The Passaic Falls provided immense water power, which visionaries like Alexander Hamilton later recognized as essential for building America's industrial future. Mills, factories, and workshops dotted the landscape, setting the stage for New Jersey's eventual transformation into one of the nation's manufacturing powerhouses. At the same time, cultural life blossomed. Schools expanded, newspapers flourished, and religious communities rebuilt after the disruptions of war. The College of New Jersey, later Princeton University, became a beacon of intellectual life, producing statesmen, ministers, and scholars. Civic organizations emerged, promoting charity, education, and public welfare. Identity, too, began to solidify. New Jerseyans, long shaped by Dutch, English, Quaker, Scottish, and German influences, now found themselves united by shared experiences of war and rebuilding. They were neither wholly New Yorkers nor entirely Pennsylvanians. They were something distinct. Their state had been the cockpit of the Revolution and now was determined to be a driving force in the new republic. Yet even as New Jersey looked forward, its early political experiment with expanded voting rights came under pressure. By the early 19th century, as political parties grew stronger and elections more competitive, accusations of fraud began to circulate. Opponents claimed that women voters and free black voters were being manipulated or improperly recorded. Whether true or not, these charges provided justification for restricting the electorate. In 1807, the state legislature passed a law limiting voting rights to white male taxpayers, ending one of the most remarkable and progressive chapters in early American political history. Despite this regression, the foundations of democratic participation remained strong. Town meetings continued, local debates thrived, and New Jersey citizens stayed engaged in shaping their state. The withdrawal of voting rights for many did not erase the broader political culture that had taken root during the Revolution. New Jersey's identity as a state that valued participation and self-governance endured. As the 19th century dawned, New Jersey had transformed from a war-torn borderland into a functioning, ambitious state. It had rebuilt its towns, restored its economy, and established political institutions capable of self-rule. Its leaders contributed to national debates, its industries laid groundwork for future growth, and its citizens, men and women, free and enslaved, European and indigenous, helped shape a collective identity forged in both hardship and hope. The Revolution had asked New Jersey to endure unimaginable trials. The early republic now asked it to help build a nation. And in the decades ahead, the state would find itself at the center of new transformations: industrialization, immigration, transportation revolutions, and cultural change that would shape not only its own destiny, but the destiny of the United States. For now, however, as the 18th century drew to a close, New Jersey could finally breathe. The fires of war had been extinguished. The debates of the constitutional era had concluded. A new state had emerged, resilient, dynamic, and ready to step into its role as a central thread in the American story. Chapter 7. The Industrial Age. As the 19th century began, New Jersey stood on the threshold of a transformation unlike anything it had experienced before. The revolutionary generation had laid the foundation for a functioning state and a stable government. But a new force was stirring, one that would reshape not only New Jersey, but the entire nation. The Industrial Revolution, already emerging in Europe, began to reach American shores, and New Jersey, with its rivers, geography, and strategic location, found itself positioned perfectly to become one of the earliest centers of American industry. Even before factories dotted its landscape, the seeds of industrial ambition had already been planted. Alexander Hamilton, soldier, statesman, and visionary, believed passionately that America's future would be built on manufacturing as much as agriculture. Where others imagined a republic of farmers, Hamilton saw a nation of workshops, mills, and innovation. And in his search for a place to launch this vision, he found a powerful ally in New Jersey's natural environment. At the edge of the Watchung Mountains, the Passaic River plunged dramatically over a series of rocky cliffs, forming the Great Falls of Patterson. The thunderous cascade, 77 feet high, delivered an extraordinary surge of water power. Hamilton saw it and immediately understood its potential. Here, he believed, America could build a manufacturing city that would rival the great industrial centers of Europe. In 1791, working with the influential Society for Establishing Useful Manufactures, the SUM, Hamilton helped found the nation's first planned industrial city, Paterson. The idea was bold. The project was even bolder. Engineers carved raceways, water channels that diverted the power of the falls into mills along the riverbanks. Factories rose where forests had once stood. Workers arrived from across the Northeast and from Europe, drawn by the promise of jobs and the energy pulsing through the new industrial town. The sound of machinery soon echoed through the valley, mingling with the roar of the falls. Paterson quickly became a symbol of American ambition. At first, the factories focused on cotton and textiles, but the town soon expanded into other industries. Ironworks emerged, producing tools, machinery, and firearms. Skilled workers forged everything from nails to locomotive parts. The demand for iron soared as the young nation expanded westward, and Paterson supplied much of it. The town earned a growing reputation not only for its productivity, but for the quality of its craftsmanship. Then came silk. In the mid-19th century, Paterson transformed into the Silk City. The shift began when entrepreneurs realized that the steady power of the Great Falls could support the delicate yet intensive machinery needed for silk production. Immigrant labor, skilled artisans from England, Italy, Germany, and later Eastern Europe, arrived with knowledge passed down through generations. Silk mills multiplied across Paterson, their long brick buildings glowing with gas lamps at night, their windows rattling with the rhythm of spinning frames. By the late 1800s, Paterson was America's premier center for silk manufacturing, producing ribbons, thread, and fabrics that adorned clothing across the nation. This rapid industrialization was not confined to Paterson. All across New Jersey, towns and cities evolved in response to new economic forces. Iron foundries in places like Boonton and Phillipsburg supplied machinery and weapons. Newark grew into a major center of leather manufacturing and brewing. Trenton's potteries, most famously the Trenton Potteries Company, turned clay into decorative tiles and household ceramics admired nationwide. Camden became a hub of shipbuilding and heavy industry. The state's identity began to shift. What had been an agricultural corridor between New York and Philadelphia was becoming a powerhouse of production. Yet, industry needed more than water power. It needed transportation, and New Jersey rose to the challenge. One of the most ambitious projects of the era was the Morris Canal. Conceived in the 1820s, the canal was designed to link the Delaware River with the Hudson, cutting directly across northern New Jersey. Its purpose was bold: to carry coal from Pennsylvania's mines to markets along the East Coast. But the terrain posed a nearly impossible challenge. New Jersey was not a flat state. Its landscape rose and fell in steep ridges that would have crippled most canal projects. Yet engineers persisted, building an ingenious system of inclined planes, sloping tracks where boats were lifted and lowered by massive water-powered machinery. It was one of the engineering marvels of its time, moving boats hundreds of feet in elevation across nearly 107 miles. The Morris Canal brought prosperity to the towns along its path and provided the fuel needed to power factories throughout the state. Alongside canals came railroads, faster, more reliable, and able to carry far heavier loads. New Jersey embraced them with enthusiasm. The Camden and Amboy Railroad, chartered in 1830, became one of the earliest and most important rail lines in America. It connected New York and Philadelphia by running directly through New Jersey, making the state a centerpiece of East Coast transportation. Trains thundered through farmland and forest, bringing workers to factories and products to distant markets. Soon, dozens of rail lines crisscrossed the state, linking its cities to the national economy. As factories multiplied and railroads expanded, New Jersey experienced a population boom. Immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe arrived in waves, seeking the steady wages offered by industrial jobs. Entire neighborhoods formed around factories, tight-knit communities where languages mixed, food traditions merged, and cultural identities endured. Churches, schools, and mutual aid societies helped families adapt to their new lives. New Jersey's towns grew larger, louder, more diverse. Smokestacks rose like monuments to a new age. But industrialization did not simply reshape landscapes and labor. It also transformed innovation itself, and nowhere was this more evident than in a quiet corner of central New Jersey, in a place called Menlo Park. In 1876, a young inventor named Thomas Alva Edison established a research laboratory in Menlo Park. It was not a typical workshop. It was the world's first true invention factory, a place where scientists, machinists, engineers, and experimenters collaborated on ideas around the clock. Edison envisioned a system where invention was continuous, not accidental, where teams worked methodically, using trial, error, and precision to solve problems systematically. The Menlo Park Laboratory soon became a symbol of boundless creativity. It was here that Edison improved the telegraph, created the phonograph, and conducted thousands of experiments on electrical illumination. His team worked by the glow of gas lamps late into the night, their efforts echoing across the fields. In 1879, after experimenting with countless materials, Edison produced a practical, long-lasting incandescent light bulb, a device that would change human life forever. Crowds traveled to Menlo Park to see the miracle. Newspapers spread the story across the world. For the first time, artificial light could be produced cheaply, safely, and reliably. Streets, homes, factories, and cities would never look the same again. The invention factory didn't stop there. Edison's team developed improved dynamos, switches, meters, and wiring systems. Everything needed to create a complete electrical network. They designed the foundations of the modern power grid. Menlo Park became the birthplace of electric utilities, audio recording, and numerous innovations that touched nearly every sector of American life. The laboratory was so influential that it transformed New Jersey's identity once again. The state that had been a battlefield in the Revolution and a manufacturing center in the early Republic became, almost overnight, the cradle of modern technology. Workers from Patterson's mills, engineers from Newark's ironworks, and young minds from Princeton and Rutgers all felt the magnetic pull of innovation. Edison eventually moved his operations to West Orange, where he built an even larger complex. But Menlo Park remained legendary, a symbol of America's transition into a technological age. Visitors described it as a place where the future seemed to be invented daily. Young inventors flocked to New Jersey, eager to test ideas in an environment that valued creativity and experimentation. By the late 19th century, New Jersey had become a state of astonishing complexity. Its farms still produced abundant crops, feeding growing cities along the East Coast. Its factories churned out textiles, iron, pottery, locomotives, ships, and machinery. Its railroads and canals linked oceans and rivers. Its ports bustled with trade. Its laboratories inspired global innovation. The state that once lay quietly between two major cities now powered the transformation of the entire nation. Yet this industrial rise brought new challenges. Pollution darkened skies. Rivers grew contaminated. Workers, men, women, and children, labored long hours in dangerous conditions. Strikes erupted as laborers demanded fair wages and safer workplaces. Immigrants crowded into tenements, struggling to adapt to industrial life. The very forces that built New Jersey's prosperity sparked tensions that would unfold in the next century. But in the 19th century, the momentum felt unstoppable. From the roar of Paterson's waterfalls to the clatter of Newark's factories, from the steady rhythm of trains crossing the state to the glow of new electric lights in Menlo Park, New Jersey, was forging a new identity, one rooted in invention, industry, and ambition. The state that had once been defined by farms and frontier trading posts had become America's first true tech hub. Ahead lay new transformations, immigration waves, the rise of major corporations, and the challenges of urbanization. But the foundation had been laid. New Jersey was no longer just a crossroads. It was a place where ideas, power, and innovation converged. And in the century to come, that energy would only grow stronger. Chapter 8. Immigration, Cities, and the Making of Modern New Jersey. By the late 19th century, New Jersey stood at the center of America's industrial surge, a state transformed by mills, railroads, canals, and inventors who imagined a future illuminated by electricity. But the machines and factories that powered this industrial age needed something even more essential than water, coal, or capital. They needed workers. And so, as smokestacks rose and train whistles echoed through growing cities, waves of migrants from across the world began to pour into New Jersey, reshaping its towns, its culture, and its identity more profoundly than any force since the Revolution. The earliest of these new arrivals were the Irish. Fleeing famine, poverty, and political oppression, Irish immigrants arrived in massive numbers beginning in the 1840s. Many stepped onto American soil through New York Harbor, then crossed the river into New Jersey, drawn by the promise of employment in factories, canals, and railroad construction. They took on some of the most grueling work, digging the Morris Canal, laying tracks for the Camden and Amboy Railroad, hauling coal, and toiling in iron foundries. Cities like Newark, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Paterson quickly developed Irish neighborhoods, dense with boarding houses, corner pubs, and Catholic churches where communities could preserve their faith in a new land. The Irish brought with them not only labor, but political organization. In cities dominated by Protestant elites, Irish immigrants found power through numbers. They formed fraternal societies, mutual aid groups, and eventually political clubs that would evolve into some of the most influential political machines in the state. In the crowded wards of Newark or the bustling waterfront streets of Jersey City, the Irish learned how to convert the struggles of their working-class neighbors into political leverage. Helping one another find jobs, secure housing, and navigate the challenges of life in America. Soon after the Irish came the Germans. Their presence in New Jersey stretched back to colonial days. But by the mid-19th century, their numbers surged. German immigrants brought artisanal skills, trades, and a strong cultural identity. They opened bakeries, breweries, music halls, and small manufacturing businesses. German neighborhoods in Newark and Hoboken pulsed with cultural life. Schützenparks for shooting clubs, beer gardens filled with accordion music, and Turner halls where gymnastics and physical culture thrived. Their influence on New Jersey's cultural landscape was deep and enduring, woven into the fabric of daily life long after the immigrant generation passed. But it was the Italians who would redefine the state's urban character most dramatically. Beginning in the 1880s and accelerating into the early 20th century, Italian immigrants transformed entire districts of New Jersey's largest cities. They came primarily from southern Italy, Campania, Sicily, Calabria, regions marked by poverty and limited opportunity. In Newark, the old Third Ward became the heart of a new Italian community, filled with fruit vendors, fish markets, tailors, shoemakers, and bakeries. In Jersey City, Italian families clustered around downtown parishes, building tight-knit neighborhoods with traditions that reminded them of home. Hoboken, already shaped by Germans and Irish, soon developed one of the densest Italian populations in the country. Italian immigrants took jobs in the expanding factories, silk mills in Paterson, metal shops in Newark, rail yards in Hoboken, and dockwork along the Hudson. They also carved out niches in construction and trades, laying bricks, pouring concrete, wiring electrical systems, and building the infrastructure that allowed New Jersey's cities to flourish. But beyond their labor, they brought traditions of family, food, music, and religion that reshaped daily life in countless ways. Feast festivals filled city streets with music and lights. Italian grocery stores introduced new foods, olive oil, cured meats, figs, espresso, that slowly became staples not only of immigrant households, but of the broader population. As the 20th century opened, another wave of newcomers arrived. Immigrants from Eastern Europe, Poles, Slovaks, Hungarians, Ukrainians, and Jews fleeing persecution and poverty settled in cities and industrial towns across the state. Their arrival overlapped with the cresting wave of Southern and Eastern European immigration into the United States, transforming New Jersey's ethnic landscape into a complex tapestry of languages, foods, and traditions. Eastern European workers filled positions in machine shops, textile factories, and the sprawling industrial plants that lined the Passaic and Hackensack rivers. Many Jewish immigrants opened shops or worked in the garment industry, which flourished in Newark and other urban centers. With diversity came friction, but also creativity. Neighborhoods became mosaics of distinct identities. Irish next to German, Italian next to Polish, Jewish merchants alongside Catholic laborers. Churches, synagogues, and cultural societies flourished. Newspapers in dozens of languages circulated through the streets. The state's cities became living examples of America's promise and contradictions, a place where opportunity beckoned, but poverty, overcrowding, and prejudice persisted. Growth strained the cities. Newark, once a small market town, exploded into one of America's most important industrial centers. Its factories produced everything from leather goods to jewelry to pharmaceuticals. Its port, accessible via rail and canal, turned the city into a bustling exchange point for goods from across the world. Jersey City grew in tandem, becoming a major manufacturing and railroad hub. It boasted one of the busiest waterfronts on the East Coast, with massive piers handling cargo, immigrants, livestock, and coal. Hoboken, positioned directly across the river from Manhattan, emerged as one of the nation's great transportation gateways, with ferry terminals, rail lines, and shipping piers humming day and night. Yet with prosperity came hardship. Tenement buildings rose quickly, often too quickly. Families crowded into small apartments lacking ventilation, plumbing, or sanitation. Immigrant children worked long hours in factories. Industrial accidents were common. Pollution darkened skies and poisoned rivers. Disease spread rapidly through crowded neighborhoods. But despite these conditions, communities found strength in their shared struggles. Labor movements gained momentum. The fight for workers' rights became one of New Jersey's most defining battles during this era. As factories demanded longer hours and greater output, workers organized. Irish dock workers formed unions to challenge unfair wages. German craftsmen pushed for better conditions in breweries and workshops. Italian laborers protested dangerous machinery and abusive supervisors. In Paterson, silk mill workers, many of them young women and recent immigrants, led one of the most significant strikes in American history in 1913. The Paterson Silk Strike brought national attention to the brutal conditions workers faced and to the power of collective action. Although the strike ultimately failed to secure all its demands, it sparked broader discussions about labor rights and helped fuel future reforms. Political machines emerged alongside these struggles, offering both support and control. In Jersey City, the legendary machine of Mayor Frank Hague dominated politics for decades. Hague, a master strategist with a talent for blending social services with political loyalty, built an empire of influence. His organization helped immigrants find jobs, provided food during hard times, and offered protection when families needed it. In return, he demanded votes. His style, authoritarian yet paternalistic, became the blueprint for urban political machines across the country. Supporters praised him as a champion of the working class. Critics condemned him as a tyrant. Both were right in their own way. In Newark, political dynamics were more diffuse, but no less powerful. Ethnic networks shaped voting patterns. Ward bosses controlled patronage. Civic organizations influenced city government. Political machines mediated between immigrant communities and the expanding state bureaucracy. While reformers criticized these machines for corruption, many immigrants saw them as necessary bridges to opportunity and protection in an unfamiliar world. Meanwhile, another wave of migration began reshaping New Jersey in the mid-20th century: Puerto Rican migration. Beginning in the 1940s and accelerating into the 1950s and 1960s, large numbers of Puerto Ricans moved to New Jersey, drawn by factory jobs and proximity to New York City. They settled primarily in Newark, Jersey City, Hoboken, Elizabeth, Paterson, and Perth Amboy. Puerto Rican migrants brought vibrant cultural traditions, Spanish language, music, Catholic festivals, and a deep sense of community. Their arrival coincided with the post-war industrial boom and the expansion of manufacturing, particularly in textiles, electronics, and food processing. By the 1960s, New Jersey's cities had undergone a complete transformation. Waves of immigrants had turned once quiet market towns into dense, multicultural urban centers. Streetcar suburbs expanded outward. Port terminals modernized. Black migrants from the American South arrived in large numbers during the Great Migration, adding to the cultural richness of the cities and further reshaping neighborhoods, music, churches, and political movements. Churches blended gospel with old European hymns. Barbershops buzzed with languages from 3 continents. Markets sold food from Italy, Poland, Puerto Rico, and the Deep South. These demographic changes reshaped not only daily life, but also the identity of New Jersey itself. It became a state where no single ethnic group dominated, where cities were defined by their diversity, and where each wave of newcomers added a new layer to the collective culture. Newark's ironbound district became famous for Portuguese and Brazilian immigrants. Jersey City gained strong Filipino, Indian, and Middle Eastern communities in addition to its existing diversity. Hoboken layered Italian heritage with artists, musicians, and young professionals drawn by proximity to Manhattan. Urban transformation was rapid but uneven. Prosperity and poverty existed side by side. New industries flourished while old factories closed. Highways cut through neighborhoods, displacing families. Suburbanization pulled middle-class residents away from cities, leaving behind economic challenges that would erupt in social tensions in the decades ahead. But through it all, New Jersey's cities remained places of opportunity, reinvention, and cultural fusion, products of the immigrant waves that had defined them since the industrial era began. By the close of the 20th century, the story of immigration in New Jersey was far from over. New arrivals continued to shape the state. New groups from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East contributing to the evolving mosaic. But the foundation had been laid long before, by the Irish digging canals, the Germans brewing beer, the Italians weaving silk, the Jews opening shops, the Poles forging steel, and the Puerto Ricans powering mid-century industry. New Jersey, once a quiet rural colony, had become one of the most diverse, dynamic states in the country. A place where the world had come to build, labor, dream, and define what it meant to be American. Up ahead, new forces, modern transportation, suburban expansion, and massive infrastructure projects would reshape the state again. But the cities built by immigrants would continue to pulse with energy, history, and the enduring spirit of reinvention that had always defined New Jersey. Chapter 9: Prohibition, Gangsters, and the Roaring Jersey Shore. By the early 1920s, New Jersey's cities, shaped by generations of immigrants, industrial workers, and political machines, had become vibrant, crowded hubs pulsing with energy and ambition. But they were also primed for turmoil. Factories hummed, streets bustled, and neighborhoods evolved with each new wave of arrivals. Yet under the surface there was tension, moral debates, ethnic rivalries, economic competition, and the friction between old traditions and new freedoms. When national prohibition took effect in 1920, it collided with this already complex environment and unleashed an era of rebellion, corruption, glamour, and crime that would forever transform New Jersey's identity, especially along its legendary coastline. The 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol, struck many New Jersey residents as an intrusion, a moral crusade imposed by outsiders. Cities like Newark, Hoboken, and Jersey City were home to large immigrant populations who saw beer, wine, and spirits not as vices, but as essential parts of cultural and social life. Taverns were community centers. Beer gardens were gathering places for families. Wine was part of dinner, not a path to ruin. The idea that the federal government would outlaw something so embedded in daily life seemed absurd. Almost immediately, New Jersey became fertile ground for resistance. Speakeasies appeared in nearly every city and town. They were tucked behind barbershops, hidden in basements, disguised as restaurants, or operating quietly in private homes. Passwords, secret knocks, and coded messages became common. Jazz music leaked from behind closed doors. Smoke filled dimly lit rooms. Patrons whispered over illegal whiskey and bathtub gin. Even small towns had their hidden watering holes, often known to everyone except the local newspaper. Newark with its dense urban neighborhoods and political networks, quickly became one of the most notorious prohibition violators in the country. Police raids revealed rows of hidden barrels, elaborate escape tunnels, and even entire fake storefronts designed to disguise illegal operations. Hoboken, with its waterfront and long tradition of beer halls, became a haven for smuggling and distribution. Jersey City, under the iron-fisted rule of Mayor Frank Hague, operated in a world where law enforcement and organized crime blurred. Hague publicly claimed to oppose corruption. Yet, under his watch, alcohol flowed freely in backrooms, hotels, and boardwalk bars. But the true epicenter of Prohibition-era excess was not found inland. It was along the Jersey Shore. Atlantic City, already known for its boardwalk, grand hotels, and summertime crowds, exploded into international notoriety during the 1920s. Unlike other cities that maintained a thin veneer of lawfulness, Atlantic City embraced prohibition as an opportunity. Its leaders, politicians, gangsters, hoteliers, and businessmen worked together in a carefully choreographed system where nearly everything was available for the right price. Alcohol, gambling, prostitution, and lavish entertainment flourished openly despite federal law. The city marketed itself as a place where visitors could indulge in pleasures banned elsewhere. This culture did not emerge accidentally. It was built, managed, and controlled by one of the most influential political machines in American history, led by a man named Enoch "Nucky" Johnson. Dressed in tailor-made suits, always carrying a fresh carnation in his lapel, Nucky presided over Atlantic City like a monarch. He controlled city contracts, police appointments, and access to the most lucrative enterprises along the boardwalk. If a hotel wanted to stay open or a nightclub wanted protection, it went through Nucky. If a business wanted to flourish, it paid Nucky. If a politician wanted power, Nucky delivered votes. His influence stretched far beyond the city, into state and national politics. Under Nucky's watch, rum running became one of the most profitable industries at the Jersey Shore. Offshore, miles beyond the legal reach of American authorities, ships known as Rum Row anchored near the coastline carrying whiskey, rum, and other spirits from Canada and the Caribbean. Smaller, faster boats, often operated by daring local fishermen, sped out under cover of darkness to smuggle the alcohol back to shore. They navigated through treacherous waves, federal patrols, and rival gangs. Many became local legends, celebrated for their fearlessness and cunning. The coastline from Sandy Hook to Cape May buzzed with covert activity. It was a dangerous but lucrative trade. Once on land, the liquor moved into cities through a network of bootleggers, corrupt officials, and crime syndicates. Atlantic City's hotels, from the Traymore to the Marlborough Blenheim, hosted grand parties where alcohol flowed as freely as the ocean just beyond the boardwalk. Jazz musicians played late into the night, attracting crowds from New York, Philadelphia, and beyond. Tourists came seeking escape, anonymity, and adventure. They found it all in Atlantic City. Even during the off-season, the city thrived. Conventions flocked to its hotels, incentivized by the promise of unrestricted entertainment. Deals were brokered in smoke-filled rooms. Gangsters from across the country attended the infamous 1929 Atlantic City Conference, a meeting of mob leaders that helped shape national organized crime. Nucky Johnson played host, offering luxury, privacy, and protection. While Atlantic City flourished, the broader Jersey Shore entered a golden age of leisure. From Asbury Park to Long Branch, From Wildwood to Cape May, new amusements, pavilions, dance halls, and pleasure piers attracted millions of visitors. Families strolled along boardwalks lined with arcades, saltwater taffy shops, photo booths, and theaters. The beaches filled with sunbathers, swimmers, and vacationers escaping crowded cities. The Jersey Shore was no longer just a summer retreat. It became a symbol of American culture, glamour, and carefree indulgence. Yet beneath the laughter, music, and lights, darker currents flowed. Organized crime expanded as profits soared. Bootlegging operations required protection, and protection required violence. Rival gangs clashed in bars and back alleys. In places like Newark and Elizabeth, crime lords such as Abner "Longy" Zwillman built powerful syndicates tied to national networks. Zwillman, often called the Al Capone of New Jersey, controlled much of the illegal liquor distribution and later expanded into gambling, real estate, and labor racketeering. His reach extended into Hollywood, unions, and major corporations. Corruption permeated local governments. Police officers accepted bribes. Judges dismissed charges for well-connected bootleggers. City officials enforced laws selectively. Political machines thrived on a combination of patronage, intimidation, and community loyalty. For many working-class families, these machines provided security and services that the government failed to deliver. But they also preserved the power of figures like Nucky Johnson and Frank Hague, whose dominance relied on a delicate balance of fear and favor. Despite the chaos, the 1920s became known as the Roaring Twenties, a decade of prosperity fueled by industry, entertainment, and cultural transformation. The Jersey Shore became a symbol of modern America, where leisure and excitement blended with rebellion and risk. From jazz halls in Atlantic City to boardwalk dance floors in Asbury Park, a new social world emerged, one that embraced music, fashion, and liberation. But the party could not last forever. In 1929, the stock market crashed, plunging the nation into the Great Depression. Factories closed, workers lost jobs, stores shuttered, families struggled to survive. The glittering lights of the Jersey Shore dimmed as tourism declined. Bootlegging profits shrank. Speakeasies emptied. Even Nucky Johnson faced pressure as federal investigators closed in. He was eventually convicted of tax evasion in 1941, ending an era where one man had controlled an entire city. The legal landscape shifted too. In 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. Alcohol became legal once again, undermining the bootlegging networks that had fueled organized crime. Bars reopened openly. Breweries gained legitimacy. Some criminals tried to adapt. Others faded into obscurity. Yet the legacy of the Prohibition era endured. Atlantic City remained famous for its nightlife, though its grandeur would rise and fall in cycles throughout the 20th century. The boardwalk continued to draw crowds, its identity shaped forever by the roaring decades of illicit glamour. The Jersey Shore as a whole retained its allure. Family vacations, sun-drenched summers, and iconic boardwalks blending with stories of bootleggers, jazz musicians, and political bosses. New Jersey itself was forever changed. Prohibition had revealed the tensions between law and tradition, morality and freedom, order and corruption. It had exposed the power of political machines and the resourcefulness of immigrant communities. It had brought together crime, business, and politics in ways that would echo for generations. And it had cemented the Jersey Shore's status as one of America's most culturally significant destinations, a place where pleasure, rebellion, and opportunity intertwined. As the 1930s came to a close, New Jersey stood at another turning point. The Depression lingered, war clouds gathered overseas, and cities faced new challenges of inequality and unrest. But even in those difficult decades, the memory of the Roaring '20s continued to shimmer, reminding the state of a time when the music never seemed to end. The boardwalk glowed with promise, and the future felt as bright as the lights reflecting off the Atlantic Ocean. Chapter 10: War, Suburbia, and the Garden State Miracle. When the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, New Jersey remained a state shaped by decades of immigration, political machines, industry, and the roaring energy of the Jersey Shore. But just as the echoes of Prohibition were fading and the Depression continued to test families, a force far larger than any domestic struggle swept into view. World War II pulled New Jersey into a chapter of unprecedented mobilization and transformation, one that would reshape its cities, its economy, and its very identity. Factories that had gone silent during the Depression roared back to life. Plants in Newark, Patterson, and Camden retooled to produce weapons, aircraft parts, uniforms, and machinery. The Kearney shipyards, sprawling along the Hackensack River, became one of the most productive shipbuilding complexes in the world, launching Liberty ships at breathtaking speed. Camden's New York Shipbuilding Corporation churned out aircraft carriers and cruisers. The state's chemical companies, concentrated near Linden, Bayonne, and the Raritan River, supplied essential materials for the war effort. Skilled and unskilled workers alike, men, women, immigrants, and lifelong New Jerseyans, found employment in these booming industries. Women, many of whom had struggled to support their families during the Depression, now filled the assembly lines. They welded steel, operated machines, tested equipment, and became a critical part of the wartime workforce. Posters encouraging women to join the effort-decorated factories. Lunchrooms filled with workers from every background, united by a common purpose. The war transformed not only the economy, but the roles that women played in society. When peace eventually arrived, many felt they had earned a permanent place in the workforce, reshaping family life and expectations for generations to come. Meanwhile, soldiers moved through New Jersey in enormous numbers. Fort Dix processed countless recruits heading overseas. Camp Kilmer in Edison became one of the largest staging areas for the European theater. Troop trains rolled through New Jersey rail yards day and night. Families gathered at stations to wave goodbye or to welcome loved ones returning home on leave. These movements added a sense of urgency, patriotism, and heartbreak to everyday life. But amid the intensity of war, something else was taking shape. Something more subtle but ultimately just as transformative. When soldiers returned and wartime production ceased, New Jersey faced a question: what now? The answer would lead to one of the most dramatic shifts in American social history. The post-war years brought prosperity, rising incomes, and a generation ready to build families. The baby boom had begun, and with it came the rise of the American suburb. In New Jersey, this transformation happened at breathtaking speed. The state's geography, wedged between New York City and Philadelphia, made it an ideal environment for suburban growth. Returning veterans wanted homes, space, and stability. Developers responded by building entire communities from the ground up. Levittown, though located in nearby New York and Pennsylvania, inspired developers across New Jersey to replicate its model. Affordable, mass-produced homes with small yards, tree-lined streets, and the promise of a better life. Subdivisions sprouted across Bergen, Middlesex, Union, and Monmouth counties. Highways became the arteries of this new way of life. The construction of the New Jersey Turnpike in the early 1950s revolutionized travel, connecting north and south with a road so efficient that it became famous nationwide. The Garden State Parkway, completed around the same time, opened the shore to millions of vacationers and commuters. Suddenly, it was possible to work in Manhattan or Newark and live miles away in a quiet, leafy suburb. The automobile became an essential part of identity. Freedom, mobility, and opportunity all rolled into one. Each new subdivision attracted families hungry for stability and community. Lawns were manicured. Barbecues became weekend rituals. Neighborhood schools sprang up and quickly overflowed with children. Living rooms filled with televisions, broadcasting everything from the Ed Sullivan Show to the first moon landing. Shopping centers replaced downtown markets. The rhythms of life changed entirely. New Jersey became an iconic suburban state, a reflection of America's post-war optimism. But this transformation was not uniform or uncomplicated. Cities like Newark, Jersey City, and Camden experienced population declines as middle-class residents, many of them white, moved to the suburbs, while African American and Puerto Rican migrants from the South and the Caribbean moved into urban neighborhoods seeking opportunity. This demographic shift created new cultural vibrancy, but also new pressures. Overcrowded housing, strained services, job discrimination, and limited access to the new suburban prosperity. Still, while cities struggled with these challenges, the broader state economy flourished. Industry adapted to peacetime demands. New Jersey began to reinvent itself not merely as a manufacturing powerhouse, but as a center of science, research, and innovation. The seeds of this transformation had been planted long before. By Edison in Menlo Park, by early chemists along the Raritan, by visionaries who saw that knowledge could drive prosperity just as powerfully as machines. In the post-war decades, this vision fully bloomed. New Brunswick became home to major pharmaceutical companies such as Johnson & Johnson, which expanded dramatically in the mid-20th century. Rutgers University transformed into a major research institution, fostering breakthroughs in science, engineering, and medicine. Bell Labs, located in Murray Hill and later Holmdel, became one of the greatest research centers in world history. Its scientists pioneered technologies that would later define the modern era: the transistor, satellite communication, fiber optics, digital signal processing. These achievements earned multiple Nobel Prizes and cemented New Jersey's role as a global center of innovation. Across the state, industrial parks and research labs grew in number. The pharmaceutical industry boomed, taking advantage of New Jersey's skilled workforce and proximity to major markets. High-tech firms emerged, building on the foundation laid by Bell Labs. Companies specializing in electronics, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, and chemical engineering made New Jersey their home. The state's identity began to shift yet again. From factories and mills to laboratories and corporate headquarters, education expanded to keep pace with these changes. New universities and colleges grew rapidly. Glassboro State, Montclair State, and Stockton evolved into major institutions. Community colleges emerged across the state, offering accessible pathways to education for returning veterans, working adults, and immigrants. High schools expanded with new science labs, sports fields, and vocational programs. The children of the baby boom filled classrooms with unprecedented energy. As the economy diversified, New Jersey's population continued to grow. The post-war baby boom made the Garden State one of the most densely populated regions in the country. Different ethnic groups shaped the character of communities. Italian, Irish, and Polish families bought homes in Bergen and Essex counties. African American families shaped the culture of Newark, Trenton, and Camden. Puerto Rican communities grew in Elizabeth and Passaic. Later, new waves of immigrants from Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America added depth to the state's demographic tapestry. Suburban life became deeply symbolic. In neighborhoods from Paramus to Edison, from Cherry Hill to Wayne, the suburban dream took root. Families celebrated graduations on newly laid football fields. Teenagers learned to drive on winding residential streets. 4th of July parades brought entire communities together. The suburban home, with its garage, yard, and leafy street, became the defining image of post-war New Jersey. But prosperity came with costs. Highways carved through wetlands and forests. Pollution from refineries and factories choked rivers like the Passaic and the Raritan. Traffic became a hallmark of daily life. Urban areas faced significant economic decline as industries relocated and residents moved outward. Racial segregation, through redlining, discriminatory lending, and housing covenants, created sharp divides between communities. While some suburbs thrived, cities struggled with poverty, unemployment, and strained services. Still, even amid these challenges, New Jersey's post-war transformation remained one of the most remarkable in the country. The state had reinvented itself once again. It had moved from industrial powerhouse to technological engine, from immigrant enclave to multicultural mosaic, from farmland and factories to sprawling suburbs and research centers. The Garden State had earned its nickname not only from its agricultural heritage, but from the idea that growth, economic, cultural, demographic, was woven into its very identity. By the 1970s, New Jersey had become one of the wealthiest, most educated, and most densely populated states in the nation. Its highways were among the busiest. Its suburbs were among the most desirable. Its research institutions were among the most innovative. And its cultural diversity was among the richest in the United States. The Garden State miracle had unfolded in just a few decades, reshaping the future for millions of families. Yet even as the post-war boom settled into routine and the suburban landscape matured, new forces were already beginning to stir. Political shifts, racial tensions, environmental concerns, and cultural transformations that would define the late 20th century. But for the generation that lived through World War II and the years that followed, New Jersey's story was one of reinvention, resilience, and opportunity. It was a place where war factories gave way to research labs, where farmland gave way to neighborhoods, where returnees built families, and where the American dream, however imperfect, found one of its strongest footholds. And it was only just beginning. Chapter 11. Race, Reform, and the Cities in Crisis. By the time the 1960s arrived, New Jersey had become the quintessential suburban state. The highways were filled with commuters heading toward offices in Newark, New York, and Philadelphia. Subdivisions stretched across former farmland in Bergen, Middlesex, Union, and Burlington counties. Shopping malls replaced the corner markets and downtown storefronts that had once defined community life. For many families, the state offered stability, prosperity, and safety in the years after World War II. But beneath the calm of tree-lined boulevards and new split-level homes, the cities that had fueled New Jersey's industrial might were changing rapidly. Decades of suburbanization, highway construction, and deindustrialization had weakened the economic foundations of cities like Newark, Camden, Paterson, and Jersey City. Businesses moved to the suburbs or to the south, chasing cheaper land and lower taxes. Middle-class residents followed highways outward, draining cities of revenue. Meanwhile, African American and Puerto Rican families, arriving as part of the Great Migration or seeking opportunity in the Northeast, moved into the older neighborhoods that white families were leaving behind. The 1960s brought a collision of forces: racial inequality, economic uncertainty, political tension, and growing distrust between communities and those meant to protect them. This turbulent period would push New Jersey into one of the most challenging chapters of its history, and ultimately force a reckoning that reshaped the state for generations. Nowhere were these pressures more intense than in Newark. Once one of America's great industrial hubs, Newark was home to thriving factories, a bustling airport, port facilities, and more than 400,000 residents. But as the post-war era unfolded, Newark suffered a dramatic decline. Between 1950 and 1967, tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs disappeared. Highways carved through the city's neighborhoods, displacing families. Suburban malls undercut downtown businesses. Meanwhile, African American residents, many of whom had moved from the South seeking a better life, found themselves concentrated in overcrowded areas with limited job prospects, inadequate housing, and poor public services. They faced discrimination in employment, lending, and policing. The city's police department, overwhelmingly white at the time, had a long history of strained relations with Newark's black residents. Complaints of brutality and harassment were common. Tensions simmered with each controversial arrest, each public dispute, each municipal decision that seemed to deepen inequality rather than alleviate it. By July 1967, Newark was a powder keg. On the night of July the 12th, everything ignited. A black taxi driver named John Smith was arrested for a traffic violation. Witnesses claimed he was beaten by police officers while in custody. Rumors spread through the city faster than the truth could stabilize them. Crowds formed outside the precinct. Anger surged. Confrontations escalated. What began as a protest erupted into one of the most devastating uprisings in American history. For 5 days, Newark burned. Crowds surged through the streets, smashing windows, looting stores, and confronting police. Officers, some overwhelmed and others driven by fear or hostility, responded with force. The National Guard was called in, its armored vehicles rolling through neighborhoods already scarred by decades of neglect. Helicopters circled overhead. Gunfire echoed in alleyways. Smoke from burning buildings drifted across the city. The violence escalated with each hour. By the time the uprising subsided, 26 people had died, most of them black residents, and hundreds more were injured. Entire blocks lay in ruins. Businesses were destroyed. Newark's reputation, already fragile, was shattered on a national scale. The Newark uprising was not an isolated incident. That summer, cities across the country, including Detroit, experienced similar unrest. The underlying issues were national: segregation, discrimination, poverty, police-community conflict, and political marginalization. But in New Jersey, the uprising became a turning point. It forced the state to confront the reality of inequality that had been shadowed by the glow of suburban prosperity. The aftermath brought both despair and determination. Some residents fled the city permanently, accelerating the already ongoing white flight. Others stayed and fought for change. Community leaders organized protests, demanded political representation, and pushed for reforms in housing, education, and policing. For the first time, significant numbers of Black and Latino residents gained influence in municipal politics, running for office or joining local boards and commissions. Activism expanded beyond Newark. Across New Jersey cities, civil rights organizations, NAACP branches, CORE chapters, local unions, church groups, and grassroots movements formed alliances to challenge discriminatory practices. They filed lawsuits demanding fair housing. They organized tenant associations. They negotiated with school officials to address segregation and unequal resources. They built coalitions that crossed ethnic and racial lines. One of the most significant shifts that followed the Newark uprising was the rise of Black political leadership in the state. In 1970, Newark elected Kenneth A. Gibson, the first Black mayor of a major northeastern city. His election was celebrated across the country as a milestone in American urban politics. Gibson inherited a city devastated by unrest and long-term structural decline. But his leadership symbolized a new era of representation and possibility. Under Gibson and other emerging leaders, efforts were made to stabilize city finances, attract new businesses, improve housing, and rebuild trust between communities and institutions. Progress was uneven, often frustrated by economic challenges beyond any mayor's control. But the symbolism of Gibson's victory, and those that followed, marked a permanent shift in New Jersey's political landscape. Camden, too, faced its own crisis. Once home to major employers like RCA and Campbell's Soup, Camden saw its industrial base collapse in the second half of the 20th century. Poverty soared. Crime increased. Schools struggled with limited funding. The construction of highways further isolated neighborhoods. Like Newark, Camden became a flashpoint for debates about urban decline, systemic inequality, and the need for comprehensive reform. Other cities, Paterson, Jersey City, Trenton, and Elizabeth, faced similar pressures. Each had its own patterns, its own neighborhoods, its own political dynamics. But all experienced the challenges of post-industrial transition. Factories closed, tax revenues dwindled, services deteriorated, families moved away. In some places, entire blocks were abandoned. Urban decline had become a defining feature of the era. Yet even in the darkest years, seeds of renewal were being planted. University expansions created islands of stability. Rutgers in Newark and Camden, NJIT in Newark, and Princeton in the central part of the state. Medical centers, including the University Hospital in Newark, offered stable employment and essential services. Cultural institutions persisted, museums, theaters, and historic sites that preserved local identity. Artists repurposed abandoned factories for studios. Immigrant communities revitalized commercial corridors, opening restaurants, grocery stores, salons, and markets. Political leaders, activists, and civic organizations increasingly recognized that cities could not be abandoned. They needed investment, not judgment. Solutions, not blame. The federal government launched programs aimed at urban renewal. Some controversial, others essential. High-rise public housing projects attempted to address housing shortages, though many later became symbols of chronic neglect. Redevelopment authorities cleared older neighborhoods, often displacing longtime residents. Expressways were proposed and sometimes built, carving new scars through cities already struggling. But renewal also brought long-term opportunities. Newark built a new arts center and invested in its transportation infrastructure. Jersey City began to transform its waterfront from a wasteland of abandoned piers into a hub of offices, apartments, and cultural spaces. Hoboken, once a declining port city, gradually attracted young professionals and artists who renovated brownstones and revitalized the local economy. These shifts did not erase the pain of the 1960s, nor did they solve the complex issues that had fueled unrest. But they signaled that transformation, slow, uneven, and fraught, was possible. Throughout these decades, the broader state continued to grow. Suburban prosperity remained strong. Research institutions expanded. Corporate headquarters flourished. New immigrants arrived from Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East, adding new layers to the statewide mosaic. Education, healthcare, and biotech industries thrived. The contrast between suburban affluence and urban struggle persisted. But the story of New Jersey remained dynamic and evolving. Leaders emerged who sought to bridge these worlds. Figures in government, business, and civic life who recognized that the future of the state depended on strengthening both its cities and its suburbs. Efforts to support affordable housing, modernize transportation, reform policing, and expand educational access slowly gained momentum. New Jersey, so often caught between decline and reinvention, began to chart a path that acknowledged its complex past while striving for a more equitable future. The Newark Uprising of 1967 had exposed the deepest fractures in the state's social fabric. But it had also awakened a force for change. It had given rise to new voices. Activists, community organizers, educators, pastors, and political leaders who refused to let New Jersey cities be defined only by crisis. In the years ahead, the state would continue to grapple with the consequences of race, inequality, and urban decline. But it would also celebrate new waves of renewal. Moments of progress, cultural resurgence, economic transformation, and community resilience. The story of modern New Jersey would be written through this tension, the struggle between the weight of the past and the promise of the future. As the 20th century moved toward its close, New Jersey entered yet another chapter, one where suburbs, cities, factories, laboratories, and diverse communities all converged to shape the identity of a state unlike any other in America. And the legacy of the upheavals of the 1960s would remain, not as a wound alone, but as a reminder of the work required to build a more just and inclusive Garden State. Chapter 12. Casinos, Highways, and the Reinvention of the Jersey Shore. As New Jersey moved into the final decades of the 20th century, the state carried with it the scars of past struggles. Urban decline, racial tensions, industrial flight, but also signs of revival and reinvention. Suburbs thrived, research centers expanded, and new immigrant communities added layers of cultural richness. Yet one region in particular stood poised for dramatic transformation: the Jersey Shore, especially Atlantic City, a place long associated with glamour, excess, and the echoes of its Prohibition-era heyday. What happened there in the late 20th century would redefine not only the coastline, but also the state's entire identity in American culture. By the early 1970s, Atlantic City was no longer the vibrant paradise of the Roaring Twenties. Its once grand hotels had aged into relics. The crowds that once filled the boardwalk after World War II dwindled as families increasingly chose air travel and theme parks in Florida and California. Cheap motels replaced luxurious seaside resorts. Poverty rose. Blight scarred the neighborhoods behind the boardwalk. The wealthy no longer arrived by ferry or train, and the middle class no longer considered the city the pinnacle of vacationing. Atlantic City had entered a steep decline that threatened its very survival. But there was one idea, controversial, bold, and revolutionary, that would change everything: legalizing casino gambling. Las Vegas had already proved the profitability of casino tourism. Some New Jersey lawmakers believed that adopting a similar model could revive Atlantic City, generate jobs, and restore economic activity. Others feared crime, corruption, and moral decay. The debate consumed the state throughout the 1970s. But on November 2nd, 1976, voters approved a referendum to legalize casino gambling in Atlantic City, the only place in the state where it would be allowed. Almost immediately, construction crews, investors, and entrepreneurs flooded the city. The Chalfonte Haddon Hall Hotel was transformed into Resorts International, which opened in 1978 as the first legal casino on the East Coast. The response was electric. Tourists poured in from Philadelphia, New York, and all across the region. The boardwalk, dim and quiet only a few years earlier, lit up with neon signs, music, and crowds. Casinos created thousands of jobs in hospitality, dining, and gaming. Atlantic City had found a new lifeline. Within a few years, a skyline of gleaming casino towers rose along the ocean. Caesars, Bally's, Tropicana, and later Trump Plaza and the Trump Taj Mahal promised luxury and spectacle. High rollers arrived in limousines. Busloads of retirees lined up for slot machines. Convention organizers booked hotel ballrooms. Comedians, singers, and performers took to casino stages, reviving the old tradition of boardwalk entertainment. For the first time in decades, Atlantic City felt alive again. Yet the revival carried its own complexities. While the casinos generated enormous revenue, the benefits did not always reach the neighborhoods most in need. Streets behind the boardwalk remained impoverished. Many local families felt excluded from the prosperity happening just blocks away. Organized crime, though not as dominant as some feared, still influenced aspects of construction, union negotiations, and nightclub operations. Corruption cases involving casino licensing and political figures made headlines. The glamorous surface of the new Atlantic City concealed deeper fractures. Much like in the 1920s, when its golden age masked the challenges within. Still, for many New Jerseyans, the casinos symbolized hope, opportunity, and a renewed sense of pride. Atlantic City became once more a symbol of reinvention, a theme that would echo across the rest of the state during the late 20th century. While Atlantic City remade itself with casinos, another force was reshaping New Jersey's identity just as profoundly: the highways. The New Jersey Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway, originally built in the mid-20th century, had become iconic by the 1980s. They were more than roads. They were cultural landmarks. Millions of travelers used them to commute, vacation, or simply pass through the state. They saw oil refineries lit like industrial cathedrals, huge rest areas serving travelers 24 hours a day, and endless lines of trucks hauling goods between cities. For many outsiders, the view from these highways became their entire image of New Jersey. A fast-paced corridor of commerce, smokestacks, warehouses, and untamed traffic. But for residents, the highways held a different meaning. They were arteries connecting suburbs to cities, shore towns to inland communities. They were the backdrop of daily life, the place where families debated vacation plans, Commuters listened to morning radio, and countless drivers glimpsed sunsets over the meadowlands. Exit numbers became household vocabulary. Rest stops named after New Jersey heroes, Thomas Edison, Walt Whitman, Clara Barton, became familiar waypoints. Diners flourished along highways, becoming symbols of the state's character. Open late, eclectic, affordable, and filled with people from every background. The diner became a New Jersey institution, a place where truckers, teenagers, politicians, and families all felt equally at home. As highways shaped travel and daily life, another cultural force placed New Jersey firmly into the national imagination: television and film. For years, the state was overshadowed by New York in pop culture. But that changed dramatically with the rise of a show that would become one of the most influential in television history: The Sopranos. Premiering in 1999, the series followed mob boss Tony Soprano and his suburban North Jersey world, an intricate blend of violence, humor, psychological struggle, and family life. Though fictional, the show captured something deeply authentic about New Jersey. It portrayed diners and strip malls, wooded cul-de-sacs, and tight-knit ethnic families, the tension between traditional values and modern life. Viewers nationwide associated the state with mob stereotypes, but they also came to appreciate its complexity, its neighborhoods, its dialects, its contradictions, and its distinct sense of place. The show turned locations like the Pulaski Skyway, the Bada Bing Club, and Vesuvio's restaurant into cultural landmarks. It cemented New Jersey as a setting not just for mob stories, but for narratives about identity, like conflict, and the strange beauty of suburban life. Though some residents bristled at the stereotypes, others embraced the show's cultural impact. In many ways, The Sopranos captured a truth that locals knew well. New Jersey is messy, contradictory, and impossible to generalize. And that's exactly what makes it fascinating. But The Sopranos was not the only cultural force to shape the state's late 20th century image. Musicians from New Jersey also carried its spirit into the national consciousness. Bruce Springsteen, raised in Freehold, sang about working-class dreams and struggles, turning Highway 9, Asbury Park, and small-town Jersey life into mythic landscapes. His lyrics painted portraits of love, escape, heartbreak, and hope, stories rooted deeply in the state's rhythms. Bon Jovi, Whitney Houston, Frank Sinatra, and countless others added to the chorus, making New Jersey one of the most influential contributors to American music. Meanwhile, the Jersey Shore reinvented itself as a complex blend of family-friendly vacations and youthful nightlife. Towns like Point Pleasant, Seaside Heights, Ocean City, and Wildwood each cultivated distinct identities. Boardwalk rides, arcades, and food stalls became summer rituals. Teenagers flocked to the shore for freedom and adventure. Families returned for generations, renting the same beach houses year after year. Even as casinos dominated Atlantic City, the rest of the shore maintained its unique charm. Sun-soaked days, crashing waves, fireworks over the sand, and boardwalks that captured the essence of summer. Tourism boomed, then faltered, then boomed again. Economic cycles, weather patterns, and cultural trends shaped each decade differently. Yet the shore endured as a defining part of New Jersey's identity. A place where memories were made, where regional culture thrived, and where each town held its own history and character. Even the state's infrastructure contributed to its cultural footprint. The Meadowlands, long considered a swampland, became home to Giants Stadium, the Meadowlands Racetrack, and later the Izod Center. turning an unlikely piece of land into one of America's major sports and entertainment hubs. For many visitors, the sight of stadium lights rising from marshland next to the turnpike became an iconic symbol of the state's resourcefulness and eccentricity. As New Jersey approached the end of the 20th century, the forces that had reshaped it, casinos, highways, diners, television, music, immigration, corporate expansion, and suburbanization, wove together into a tapestry unlike any other region in the country. The state had become a bridge between past and future, industry and leisure, chaos and reinvention. Atlantic City continued to rise and fall in cycles. The casinos brought wealth, then struggled against competition from neighboring states. New development projects promised renewal but often delivered mixed results. Yet the city remained a symbol of resilience, a place that refused to fade, reinventing itself with each generation. The rest of the Jersey Shore carried forward its own traditions. Families returned every summer. Teenagers crowded arcades and boardwalk rides. Lifeguards watched over beaches. Street musicians played as the sun set over the dunes. Even when stereotypes or jokes targeted New Jersey's quirks, residents embraced them, turning them into badges of pride. Ultimately, the reinvention of the Jersey Shore and the rise of the casino era were part of a larger story about New Jersey itself. A state that had never been defined by a single identity, never fully fitting into any stereotype, continued to evolve in unexpected ways. It was a place where leisure and industry collided, where highways connected every corner, where music and television shaped cultural memory, and where the ocean remained a constant reminder of both power and promise. As the 20th century ended, New Jersey had become more than a state. It was a symbol, a complex, contradictory, vibrant mosaic that captured the essence of American life. And the forces that shaped it in the post-war decades would set the stage for its role in the 21st century. As new challenges, new communities, and new industries emerged along the same highways, coastlines, and boardwalks that had defined generations before. Chapter 13. From the Meadowlands to the World. By the end of the 20th century, New Jersey had crafted a public identity unlike that of any other state. It was the place of boardwalks and diners, casinos and commuters, small towns and crowded highways. But beneath those familiar images, another force had been shaping New Jersey's character all along, its extraordinary influence on American entertainment and culture. From the stadiums rising out of the Meadowlands to the stages of Asbury Park, from jazz lounges in Hoboken to recording studios in Newark, New Jersey, had become one of the most powerful cultural engines in the country. And the world, often without knowing it, moved to the rhythm that New Jersey helped create. Sports became one of the state's defining passions. The Meadowlands Sports Complex, built in the 1970s on land many once dismissed as unusable marsh, rose like a futuristic fortress in the middle of the North Jersey Flats. Surrounded by highways and industrial channels, it looked improbable, a stadium district in the middle of wetlands. Yet, it became one of the most important sports hubs in America. Giant Stadium, with its massive concrete exterior, was home to both the New York Giants and the New York Jets, making the Meadowlands the battleground for some of the NFL's most dramatic rivalries. Fans packed the stadium every week, their cheers merging with the roar of airplanes heading to Newark Airport and the hum of turnpike traffic. Tailgates became legendary, filled with loyal fans who stood by their teams through snowstorms, losing seasons, and miracle comebacks. The New Jersey Devils brought hockey glory to the state, capturing multiple Stanley Cups and earning a dedicated fan base. Their gritty, disciplined style reflected the attitude of the state itself, hard-working, underestimated, and hungry for recognition. The Meadowlands racetrack brought horse racing into the fold, drawing gamblers and families alike. Later, soccer rose in prominence as the Red Bulls built their own home. By the 1990s and early 2000s, the Meadowlands was not just a venue. It was a cultural landmark, a symbol of New Jersey's immersion in the world of sports. College athletics added another layer of pride. Rutgers, the state university, carried the distinction of hosting the first college football game in history in 1869. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Rutgers football surged in national profile, drawing sellout crowds and symbolizing the ambitions of a university determined to assert itself on the biggest stage. Basketball arenas filled with students cheering on their Scarlet Knights. The school's growing national reputation in academics and athletics echoed New Jersey's evolution from industrial engine to intellectual and cultural powerhouse. Yet sports were only half the story. Perhaps nothing defined New Jersey's influence on America more powerfully than its music. Frank Sinatra, born in Hoboken in 1915, carried the voice of New Jersey around the globe. His rise from the working-class waterfront to the heights of American entertainment embodied the immigrant dream. With his smooth baritone, impeccable phrasing, and effortless charisma, Sinatra reshaped popular music and left an indelible mark on generations of performers. Hoboken embraced him as a native son, and long after he moved from New Jersey, the rhythm of the state remained in his style, equal parts toughness and tenderness. Then came the rockers. Few artists captured the soul of New Jersey more completely than Bruce Springsteen. Raised in Freehold, Springsteen transformed the landscapes of his childhood. Route 9, the factories, the boardwalks, the endless dreams of working-class families, into songs that resonated with millions. His music blended poetry and raw electric energy. Asbury Park, once a fading seaside town, found new life as the backdrop of Springsteen's early career. The Stone Pony became a sacred venue, the boardwalk a lyrical landmark. His songs told stories of escape, heartbreak, youthful rebellion, and stubborn hope. They were New Jersey stories, but they belonged to the entire world. Following close behind was John Bon Jovi. Born in Perth Amboy and raised in Sayreville, he blended glam rock, pop hooks, and blue-collar sincerity into a global phenomenon. While critics often underestimated him, audiences never did. "Livin' on a Prayer" became a cultural anthem, its story of a New Jersey couple struggling to make ends meet, both specific and universal. Bon Jovi, like Springsteen, carried the state's working-class ethos into stadiums across the world. Whitney Houston added yet another layer to New Jersey's musical legacy. Raised in Newark and later East Orange, she possessed one of the greatest voices in the history of recorded music. Houston's church-trained vocals soared with grace and power, making her an international superstar and redefining pop and R&B. Her influence stretched far beyond New Jersey. Yet the roots of her voice, its emotional force, discipline, and brilliance, came directly from the state's gospel tradition and vibrant musical communities. Newark's contribution went even further. The city played a crucial role in the evolution of hip-hop and R&B, paving the way for artists who blended urban experience with lyrical innovation. Later, Wu-Tang Clan, though founded in Staten Island, drew heavily from New Jersey's scene, with several members living, recording, or growing up in the state. New Jersey became one of the major cultural arteries running through the history of hip-hop, supplying artists, producers, studios, and an audience that embraced the genre long before it dominated national charts. But the state's cultural footprint wasn't just defined by its biggest stars. Countless regional musicians, bar bands, and club performers shaped New Jersey's identity. From ska to punk to metal, from garage bands in Bergen County basements to jazz ensembles in Newark lounges, the state fostered a music culture built on authenticity and energy. Venues like Asbury Lanes, Hoboken's Maxwell's, and countless shore bars became laboratories for new sounds. Even the high school Battle of the Bands tradition felt uniquely Jersey, raw, competitive, and filled with heart. Entertainment extended far beyond music. New Jersey birthed or shaped countless actors, comedians, filmmakers, and entertainers who filled American screens. From Jack Nicholson to Danny DeVito, Queen Latifah to Anne Hathaway, Joe Pesci to Meryl Streep, the state produced artists of every style and temperament. Comedians like Chris Rock and Jon Stewart built careers partly from their observations of New Jersey life, diverse, chaotic, and endlessly funny. Kevin Smith, with his indie film Clerks, turned a quiet convenience store in Leonardo into a cinematic landmark, proving that New Jersey's ordinary places carried extraordinary stories. Television reinforced these images. Beyond The Sopranos, shows like Jersey Shore and Boardwalk Empire revived and reshaped the state's narratives in the 21st century. Some depictions were exaggerated, others carefully researched. Many sparked controversy, yet all of them cemented New Jersey as a powerful setting in American storytelling, complex, dramatic, and full of character. Sports intertwined with entertainment in the Meadowlands. As music icons sold out arenas at the Izod Center and later the Prudential Center in Newark, sports stars became celebrities in their own right. The Giants' Super Bowl victories, the Devils' Stanley Cup runs, and the Jets' eternal drama became part of the cultural heartbeat. High school sports, especially football and wrestling, added to the mythology. Entire towns rallied around Friday night lights, and local heroes filled newspaper headlines. College sports at Rutgers gained national attention as the football program grew, bringing tens of thousands of fans to Piscataway and thrusting the university into the spotlight. New Jersey's cultural impact spread because it reflected universal truths of American life. The struggle between ambition and limitation, the desire to escape and the pull of home, the tension between glamour and grit. The state's legends, Sinatra, Springsteen, Houston, Bon Jovi, each embodied a different part of this tension. Sinatra represented confidence, reinvention, and style. Springsteen channeled the dreams of small-town America. Houston brought unmatched artistry and emotional power. Bon Jovi blended pop accessibility with working-class passion. Wu-Tang blended raw storytelling with mastery of craft. Each artist stood alone, yet together they formed a tapestry of New Jersey's influence. Even the state's symbols, its turnpike exits, its diners, its shore towns, its accent, became fixtures of American pop culture. The turnpike became famous enough to appear in movies, television, literature, and comedy routines. Diners appeared as backdrops in films and as metaphors in novels. Asbury Park became synonymous with artistic rebirth. The Meadowlands became shorthand for major events and unforgettable moments. Through it all, New Jersey embraced its identity. It took pride in being a little rough around the edges, a little loud, a little misunderstood. It celebrated its legends while continuing to foster new talent. The state's diversity, ethnic, geographic, economic, meant that no single cultural narrative could ever define it. Instead, it thrived on the interplay between contrasts, urban and suburban, traditional and rebellious, aspirational and grounded. As the 20th century drew to a close and the 21st opened, New Jersey's cultural influence only expanded. New stars emerged, new sports arenas opened, new genres flourished. Yet the legacy of the state's entertainment footprint rested on the foundations built in the decades before. By the musicians who told its stories, the athletes who electrified its fans, the venues that gave life to dreams, and the communities that embraced creativity in all its forms. New Jersey, once the industrial crossroads of America, had become something else entirely. A cultural force that stretched far beyond its borders, shaping the nation's soundtrack, its entertainment landscape, its athletic passions, and its sense of who Americans were and who they could be. And in the final chapter ahead, the New Jersey of the 21st century would emerge, dynamic, diverse, challenged, and determined, as it faced a rapidly changing world. Chapter 14. The New Jersey of Today. As the 21st century unfolded, New Jersey entered a new era, one shaped by both the weight of its past and the rapid changes of an interconnected world. The state that once built industries from iron and silk, nurtured revolutionaries, produced world-famous musicians, and reinvented entire shorelines, now found itself facing challenges and opportunities unlike any before. In many ways, New Jersey today is a microcosm of America itself. Diverse, ambitious, fractured, hopeful, and constantly evolving. And as the decades rolled forward, the Garden State continued to redefine what it meant to be a modern American powerhouse. The story of 21st century New Jersey begins with its extraordinary diversity. Few places in the United States contain as many languages, cultures, cuisines, and traditions packed into such a compact space. Walking through cities like Jersey City or Elizabeth is like moving through a global mosaic. New immigrants from India, the Philippines, Nigeria, the Dominican Republic, and dozens of other countries transform neighborhoods with new businesses, faith communities, and cultural centers. In towns where Italian bakeries once dominated the block, you now find Guatemalan restaurants beside Filipino groceries, halal markets next to Korean BBQ restaurants. The cultural turnover isn't erasing New Jersey's past. It's layering it, adding new rhythms to an already complex symphony. Jersey City, in particular, became one of the most diverse cities in America. A place where young professionals arriving from New York mix with families whose roots stretch across continents. Apartment towers rose along the waterfront, and PATH trains carried new generations of residents to Manhattan and back. Newark experienced its own transformation, welcoming immigrants who revitalized neighborhoods and opened new businesses. Even suburban towns like Edison and Fort Lee shifted dramatically as South Asian and East Asian families brought new ideas of community, education, and entrepreneurship. The result was a state not merely adapted to diversity, but powered by it. This global energy fed directly into New Jersey's modern economy. Once dependent on manufacturing and heavy industry, the state reinvented itself as a hub for pharmaceuticals, technology, logistics, and higher education. The I-78 and I-287 corridors filled with corporate offices and research labs. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and Novartis turned New Jersey into one of the world's most important pharmaceutical centers, developing medicines used across the globe. The state's legacy of scientific innovation, born in the days of Edison's Menlo Park, continued as universities and private labs collaborated on breakthroughs in biotech, genetics, and medical devices. Technology expanded rapidly in the northern part of the state, where tech startups and global firms set up shop, drawn by proximity to New York and a highly educated workforce. New Jersey's universities, Princeton, Rutgers, Stevens Institute of Technology, NJIT, became engines of research and talent. Princeton, with its ivy-covered halls and Nobel Prize-winning faculty, drove discoveries in everything from quantum physics to public policy. Rutgers expanded into a major research institution with medical schools, business centers, and one of the nation's most diverse student populations. Stevens, perched on the cliffs of Hoboken, built a reputation as a leading engineering school. These academic institutions didn't just train students, they acted as magnets for industries that needed innovation to thrive. Yet this progress came with tensions. New Jersey's population grew denser, its infrastructure strained, and its politics became increasingly complex. Towns once dominated by local power brokers now juggled competing interests from developers, activists, immigrants, and longtime residents. The state found itself walking a tightrope between tradition and transformation. Transportation became one of New Jersey's most pressing challenges. The state's network of highways and tunnels, once a triumph of mid-20th century engineering, buckled under the pressure of millions of daily commuters. Trains delayed by aging infrastructure frustrated riders traveling to New York. The long-awaited Gateway Tunnel project, designed to expand rail capacity under the Hudson River, became a symbol of modern political battles, balancing federal funding, state priorities, and the urgent need for improvement. Meanwhile, the New Jersey Turnpike and Garden State Parkway, iconic arteries of the state, filled with more traffic than ever before. Environmental concerns added another layer of urgency. Rising sea levels threatened coastal towns, particularly along the Jersey Shore and the Back Bay marshes. Communities battered by Hurricane Sandy in 2012 learned firsthand how vulnerable the coast had become. The storm reshaped not just beaches and boardwalks, but also state policy, local planning, and residents' sense of security. Inland towns faced their own worries: flood-prone rivers, aging drainage systems, and industrial pollution left behind from earlier eras. The fight to preserve the Pine Barrens, one of the most unique ecosystems in the country, continued as development pressures pushed ever closer to its sandy forests and rare wetlands. At the same time, New Jersey embraced innovation in environmental policy. Wind farms off the coast promised to transform the region into a leader in renewable energy, though not without opposition from coastal residents wary of changing views. Solar panels spread across warehouses and suburban rooftops. New Jersey earned a reputation as a vanguard state in recycling, emissions regulations, and green energy mandates. The state wrestled with the contradictions of modern life: thriving industries that required power and land, balanced against a growing political will to protect natural landscapes and reduce environmental impact. Taxes, always a defining part of New Jersey's political identity, became an even more contentious topic in the 21st century. Property taxes ranked among the highest in the nation, prompting debate, frustration, and endless policy proposals. Residents saw their tax dollars support strong public schools, extensive services, and ambitious infrastructure projects. But the burden felt heavy nonetheless. People moved in and out based on cost of living, creating a demographic churn that influenced politics and local culture. Yet despite these pressures, New Jersey remained deeply committed to public education. Many of the nation's best high schools, public and private, were found in its suburbs. Towns competed fiercely for educational excellence, spending heavily on teachers, facilities, and specialized programs. This investment produced a generation of students who fed into elite universities and high-skilled professions, further reinforcing New Jersey's reputation as a center of intellect and ambition. Politics grew increasingly intense as demographic change reshaped the electorate. Urban areas leaned strongly Democratic. Suburban towns shifted in complex patterns, and discussions about equity, policing, immigration, and economic reform echoed national debates. Newark, under energetic mayors, pushed forward with ambitious redevelopment projects, attracting new businesses and residents while confronting long-standing issues of inequality and crime. Jersey City emerged as a political and economic powerhouse, often acting as a bellwether for statewide shifts. South Jersey maintained its own political identity, influenced by Philadelphia's orbit and long-standing regional loyalties. The political landscape, like the state itself, became a vibrant mosaic, fractured at times, but always dynamic. Amid these changes, New Jersey continued to nurture a strong sense of identity. That identity was no longer defined solely by its industrial past or its turnpike culture. Instead, it became a blend of heritage and reinvention, a place where Italian-American traditions thrived alongside Indian festivals, where diners coexisted with Michelin star restaurants, where suburban calm lived next to urban reinvention, where shore nostalgia blended with cutting-edge entertainment and high-tech innovation. The Jersey Shore remained a cultural cornerstone in the 21st century, though it too changed with time. Boardwalks rebuilt after storms, towns debated how to balance tourism with year-round community needs, and new generations redefined what going down the shore meant. Some visitors sought quiet beaches and eco-friendly attractions. Others pursued nightlife and casinos. Still others embraced family-friendly boardwalks in towns like Point Pleasant and Ocean City. Atlantic City faced cycles of boom and bust, but remained a symbol of both optimism and challenge, continually reinventing itself with new casinos, entertainment venues, and economic strategies. Even small towns found renewed purpose. Princeton thrived as a global academic hub. Cape May evolved into a Victorian-era jewel, with tourism centered on architecture, dining, and nature. Montclair became a cultural magnet with art galleries, theaters, restaurants, and one of the country's most diverse suburban populations. Asbury Park, once synonymous with decline, transformed into a vibrant destination filled with music venues, craft breweries, and LGBTQ+ communities that helped propel its rebirth. New Jersey's identity in the 21st century was also deeply tied to its role as a crossroads. It remained a state where millions passed through daily, on trains between New York and Philadelphia, on planes departing from Newark Airport, on ships docking at Port Newark, on trucks crossing its bridges. That constant movement made New Jersey more than a place to live. It made it a central artery of the modern American economy. And yet, for all the movement, New Jersey still held tight to its sense of home. Families formed multi-generational roots. Local traditions, high school football, church feasts, 4th of July parades, county fairs, Portuguese street festivals in Newark's Ironbound, Diwali celebrations in Edison, remained strong. Even newcomers quickly learned the unwritten rules of the state. Which exit to mention when asked where you're from, how to debate pizza, where to find the best diner, and why the shore is called the shore. As New Jersey moves deeper into the 21st century, its challenges and opportunities continue to grow. Climate change threatens its coastline. Technology reshapes its industries. Immigration renews and redefines its communities. Politics swings with the intensity of a small but densely populated state, where every vote feels consequential. Housing affordability, transportation modernization, and environmental resilience demand solutions that blend pragmatism with vision. But if the past is any guide, New Jersey will continue to adapt and lead. It will build on its heritage of invention, from Edison's early experiments to the biotech breakthroughs of today. It will rely on its diversity to fuel creativity and innovation. It will draw strength from its communities, its universities, its workforce, and its relentless, restless spirit. The Garden State's story is not merely one of survival. It is one of reinvention. From the Lenape villages to colonial trading posts, from revolutionary battlegrounds to industrial towns, from shore resorts to research labs, New Jersey has repeatedly transformed itself to meet the demands of a changing world. The New Jersey of today stands at the crossroads of its past and its future. A state defined not just by where it has been, but by where it is going. And as this audiobook closes, one truth becomes clear. The story of New Jersey is far from finished. It continues in every city street and suburban cul-de-sac, every research lab and boardwalk, every classroom and train platform, every diner booth and stadium cheer. It continues in the millions who call it home, and in the millions more whose lives are touched by its influence. New Jersey's history, like the state itself, is alive, ever-changing, ever-growing, ever-surprising. And its next chapter has already begun. Chapter 15. Why New Jersey Matters. To understand America is to understand the places that shaped it. Some states dominate our imagination through size, myth, or spectacle. Texas with its sweeping plains, California with its glittering coastline, New York with its towering skyline. New Jersey, smaller than all three, often hides in the shadow of giants. Outsiders joke about it, misunderstand it, overlook it. Yet when you trace the story of the United States, from the first footsteps on ancient trails to the fevered whir of modern laboratories, you find New Jersey woven into every era, every turning point. It is the crossroads of American history. It is the laboratory of American culture. And it is far more essential to the American story than most realize. The state's importance begins, as it always has, with geography. Wedged between New York City and Philadelphia, two of the most influential urban centers in the nation, New Jersey sits at the center of the great northeastern corridor. Its rivers, bays, and natural harbors shaped early trade routes. Its fertile land supported indigenous communities long before Europeans arrived. Its location made it the crucial link between colonies, armies, and industries. Even long before highways and trains traced their lines across the state, the land itself compelled movement. The Lenape understood the rhythm of this geography, following seasonal patterns across the Pine Barrens, the Delaware Valley, the Bay Shore, and the foothills. Later, Dutch traders, Swedish settlers, and English colonists adapted those same landscapes to their own ambitions. The result was a place that became, almost inevitably, a meeting ground. Cultures collided here before they collided anywhere else. Religions, languages, and political ideas clashed and blended. New Jersey was not a frontier in the sense of wide-open wilderness. It was a frontier of exchange, where worlds met and transformed one another. This geography created a character that would endure, practical, adaptable, and quietly influential. By the time revolution swept the colonies, New Jersey had already learned how to operate between giants. It was a colony ruled by multiple European powers, shaped by both Quaker pacifists and profit-driven proprietors, divided into East and West jurisdictions, and home to deeply varied communities. This complexity prepared it for the role it would play in the Revolution. A role not of one dramatic moment, but of countless crucial ones. The war's most decisive winter battles were fought on its soil. Its farms fed armies, its roads carried soldiers, its towns sheltered spies. Washington did not simply pass through New Jersey, he survived because of New Jersey. The state bore the weight of the war more than almost any other colony, enduring raids, occupations, and betrayals while still serving as the heartbeat of the patriot cause. After independence, New Jersey continued shaping the nation in ways rarely acknowledged, but constantly felt. Its early embrace of industry, first powered by rivers, then by canals, then by rails, turned the state into the engine room of the Northeast. In Paterson, Alexander Hamilton envisioned a future powered by manufacturing, and the city delivered. Silk wove through its mills, iron forged in its foundries, and immigrants poured in from across Europe. Later, the advances born in New Jersey would help fuel America's rise as a global industrial power. Then came Edison. The world we inhabit today, the world of recorded sound, electric light, and commercial invention, took form in a small lab in Menlo Park. The incandescent bulb, the phonograph, and countless other inventions emerged not from a palace of science, but from a cluster of workrooms beside a dirt road. Edison's laboratory was not only a birthplace of technology, it was a birthplace of the modern innovation mindset. Experiment, fail, try again, and build the future piece by piece. His work would ripple into millions of homes, across continents, and ultimately into outer space. That ripple began in New Jersey. Industrial might brought people, millions of them. Irish laborers fleeing famine, Germans escaping political upheaval, Italians seeking opportunity, Eastern Europeans arriving with dreams of stability, Puerto Ricans and African Americans drawn north by the promise of jobs and dignity. Each wave reshaped the state's towns and cities, giving New Jersey one of the most eclectic cultural tapestries in the nation. Newark, Elizabeth, Hoboken, and Jersey City became ports not just for goods, but for ideas, music, literature, and activism. These cities grew, struggled, and reinvented themselves countless times, carrying forward the dynamism that defines New Jersey's identity to this day. Entertainment flourished in this mix of diversity and ambition. New Jersey did not just produce entertainers, it produced icons. Sinatra's voice, Springsteen's poetry, Whitney Houston's power, Bon Jovi's anthems, and the raw energy of hip-hop's New Jersey rebels formed a cultural output disproportionate to the state's size. These artists didn't simply succeed. They shaped entire genres, reshaped the national imagination, and carried traces of New Jersey onto global stages. Their work reflects the state's core contradictions: grit and glamour, defiance and vulnerability, rebellion and hope. As the 20th century marched toward its close, New Jersey again found itself at the center of change. Suburbia bloomed across the landscape, turning farmland into neighborhoods and highways, into arteries of modern life. Education became one of the state's greatest strengths. Schools drew families with promises of opportunity. Universities like Princeton, Rutgers, and Stevens expanded their reach, becoming pillars of research, culture, and science. The pharmaceutical industry grew into one of the most influential in the world. Headquartered in towns many Americans had never heard of, but relied on daily. Yet none of New Jersey's progress came without challenges. Urban decline, political corruption, environmental degradation, racial tensions, and economic inequality left deep marks. Cities burned in the 1960s. Industries collapsed in the 1980s. Storms devastated the coast in the 2010s. Throughout these crises, the state wrestled with its dual identity. Proud of its achievements, aware of its shortcomings, and determined to rebuild no matter how many times reinvention became necessary. Today, in the 21st century, New Jersey stands as one of the most diverse, educated, and economically vital states in the nation. Its communities represent every corner of the globe. Its laboratories and research centers shape modern medicine. Its ports move critical goods. Its highways connect millions. Its boardwalks, far from mere tourist attractions, symbolize resilience, rebuilt again and again in the face of storms and shifting economies. And its proximity to global centers of power has not diminished its distinct voice. If anything, the constant push and pull between New York, Philadelphia, and the world beyond has strengthened New Jersey's sense of self. New Jersey matters because it has always embodied the American story in miniature. It is a place of contrasts, densely populated and wildly natural, urban and suburban, old and new, industrial and idyllic. It is a place where waves of immigrants have built communities generation after generation. A place where invention and reinvention are not optional. They are the rhythm of life. A place that serves as both a gateway and a destination. A place where pride is fierce, humor is sharp, and loyalty runs deep. It also matters because of the lessons it offers. New Jersey shows that diversity is a source of strength, not division. It shows that reinvention is possible even after periods of decline. It shows that culture can rise from unexpected places, that greatness can come from a factory town or a shore bar or a church choir in Newark. It shows that progress does not erase struggle, and struggle does not prevent progress. It shows that identity is not something fixed. It is something constantly shaped by the people who call a place home. Perhaps most importantly, New Jersey proves that influence does not require attention. The state has shaped the nation quietly, consistently, and decisively. It may not always demand the spotlight, but without it, the American story would be incomplete. As this audiobook draws to a close, the journey across New Jersey's past and present reveals a state far richer than its cliches. We've walked through the forests of the Lenape, across Dutch trading posts, into revolutionary winter camps, through the mills of Patterson, down the shore, through the cities of immigrants, into the labs of inventors, and finally into the modern streets where dozens of cultures converge. Each era adds a layer to the state's identity, each struggle adds depth, each breakthrough adds brilliance. New Jersey matters because it never stops evolving. Its story, messy, dramatic, hopeful, and real, is the story of America itself. A story of motion, ambition, conflict, creativity, resilience, and the constant drive to build something better. And so the Garden State continues forward. The next chapters will be written by immigrants building new lives, scientists shaping new technologies, musicians finding new voices, activists pushing for change, and families planting new roots. New Jersey's history has never been a closed book. It is an ongoing narrative, as dynamic and diverse as the people who live it every day. The state that gave the nation its revolution, its inventions, its shorelines, its music, its innovation, and its cultural icons will continue to shape the American future. New Jersey matters far more than most people realize, and its story is far from over.